Master Chief's descent into chaos began with a flash of light and the scream of distorted energy. One moment, he had been aboard the UNSC Infinity, overseeing the investigation of a derelict Forerunner installation. The next, he was falling through an endless void, his HUD blinking erratically as warnings flared across his visor. Warning, unknown spatial anomaly, suit integrity at risk. Cortana, he murmured, an instinctive habit that still lingered despite her absence. The AI's voice didn't answer. Only the silence of space and the roar of his own breathing filled the void. Gravity returned with a vengeance as Chief was yanked out of the swirling maelstrom of the portal and into a new, alien sky. The clouds above were choked with ash, and the faint smell of sulfur permeated the air. His suit's thrusters kicked in just before impact, slowing his descent enough to prevent death, not pain. He hit the ground with a bone-jarring crash, carving a shallow trench into the dirt. For a moment, he lay still, letting his suit's systems recalibrate. He scanned the horizon as his HUD stabilized, feeding him fragmented data on an unfamiliar world. A barren wasteland stretched out before him, dotted with jagged rock formations and sparse vegetation. Above, twin suns burned weakly in a sky painted a sickly orange. Mission priority: survive. Pushing himself to his feet, Chief assessed his surroundings. His Mjolnir armor, though scuffed from the fall, remained intact. His assault rifle was slung securely across his back, and his sidearm felt reassuringly familiar at his hip. Still, he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at his gut. This place was wrong. He didn't have long to reflect. A distant rumble drew his attention, growing louder with every passing second. Chief instinctively took cover behind a boulder, peering out to locate the source. Over a ridge, a crude vehicle topped with mismatched metal plates and adorned with crude glyphs appeared. It belched black smoke as it rumbled forward, carrying a horde of green-skinned creatures that howled with manic glee. Orcs. Chief didn't know the name yet, but the sight of their brutish forms and jagged weapons told him everything he needed to know. These were enemies. The orcs spotted him almost immediately. The lead creature, larger than the others and wielding a massive cleaver, bellowed something unintelligible before pointing directly at Master Chief. The horde erupted in laughter and snarls, eager for blood. Chief's training kicked in. He unslung his assault rifle and opened fire. The first orc charging toward him dropped with a satisfying thud, its chest peppered with armor-piercing rounds. Another fell as Chief pivoted, his movements precise and deliberate, but they kept coming. The crude vehicle screeched to a halt, and the remaining orcs leapt out, weapons blazing. Chief ducked behind the boulder as bullets and shrapnel ricocheted around him. He popped out just long enough to take down two more, their bodies crumpling into the dust. The orc leader roared, swinging its cleaver as it charged straight for Chief's cover. Chief tossed a frag grenade, its arc perfect. The explosion rocked the battlefield, throwing the leader off balance, but not stopping it. Chief readied his pistol as the hulking creature closed the gap, its feral eyes gleaming with bloodlust. At the last moment, Chief sidestepped, ducking under the cleaver's swing and unloading 3 rounds directly into the creature's skull. It stumbled, its momentum carrying it forward before collapsing into a heap. The remaining orcs hesitated, their bravado wavering without their leader. But Chief didn't give them a chance to regroup. He moved with lethal efficiency, picking them off one by one until the battlefield was silent. Smoke and blood hung heavy in the air. Chief stood amongst the carnage, his armor spattered with green blood. A sound broke the silence, a faint cry, but human. Chief's gaze snapped to a nearby ridge, where a makeshift barricade of wooden planks and rusted metal had been erected. Beyond it, a small group of civilians cowered, their faces pale and gaunt. A young woman held a rifle that looked more decorative than functional, its muzzle trembling as she aimed it at him. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice shaking. I'll shoot." Chief raised a hand, keeping his weapon pointed at the ground. "I'm not your enemy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you hurt?" The woman hesitated, glancing at the fallen orcs, her rifle lowered slightly. "You killed them." "They were attacking me," Chief replied. "I'm guessing they've been attacking you too." A grizzled older man stepped forward, leaning heavily on a crude crutch. "They've been raiding us for weeks, killed half our people and took the rest as slaves. Who are you?" Chief paused. How could he explain his presence? "A soldier," he said finally. "Not from here." The old man studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Doesn't matter where you're from. If you can fight like that, then we need your help." Chief followed the villagers back to their settlement, a collection of ramshackle buildings clustered around a small water reservoir. Children peered out from doorways, their wide eyes filled with both fear and curiosity. The adults busied themselves reinforcing barricades and tending to wounded, but their movements were sluggish, their faces marked by exhaustion. The old man introduced himself as Garrett, the de facto leader of the settlement. Over a hastily prepared meal of dried meat and grain, he explained their plight. The orcs had arrived months ago, descending from the mountains in ever-increasing numbers. The Imperium, whoever they were, had offered no aid, leaving the settlers to fend for themselves. "We sent a message to the local guard detachment," Garrett said, his voice bitter. "Never got a response. Far as they're concerned, we're not worth the effort." Chief listened in silence, his mind already working through the possibilities. The settlement's defences were pitiful, and their weapons even worse. If the orcs mounted another large-scale assault, these people wouldn't stand a chance. "How many fighters do you have?" he asked. Garrett sighed. "Not enough. Maybe 20, counting the boys who can barely hold a rifle." Chief nodded. "Then we'll need to do more than defend." The room fell silent as the settlers exchanged uncertain glances. The young woman who had pointed the rifle at Chief earlier, Lena, he learned her name was, spoke up. "You mean attack them?" "Hit their supply lines," Chief clarified. "Disrupt their operations. Make them think twice about targeting you." Garrett frowned. "That sounds like suicide." "Not if it's done right," Chief countered. "I'll lead the missions. Your people can focus on defending the settlement." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Garrett nodded slowly. "If you're willing to fight for us, we won't say no." The next day, Chief began training the settlers. He drilled them in basic combat tactics, teaching them how to aim, how to move, and how to work as a team. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Meanwhile, he scouted the surrounding area, mapping out orc patrol routes and supply depots. Their first raid was a small one, targeting an orc convoy transporting munitions. Chief led a team of 5 settlers, including Lena, who had proved to be a quick learner. They struck at night, ambushing the convoy with improvised explosives and concentrated fire. The settlers were nervous, but followed Chief's orders to the letter. When the last orc fell, their cheers were muted but genuine. "You did well," Chief said as they looted the wreckage for anything useful. "But this is just the beginning." Over the following weeks, Chief's hit-and-run tactics began to take a toll on the orcs. Supply depots were destroyed, patrols ambushed, and morale shattered. The settlers, once beaten down by despair, began to hold their heads higher. Chief's presence gave them hope, though he knew it was a fragile thing. But the orcs were nothing if not persistent. Their attacks on the settlement grew more ferocious, forcing Chief to split his attention between leading raids and reinforcing defences. It was during one such attack that Chief realised the orcs were more organised than he'd first thought. A war boss was in command, directing the assaults with brutal cunning. "We'll need to take him out," Chief told Garrett after the battle. "If we don't, they'll keep coming." Garrett nodded grimly. "Then we'd best make it count." As Chief began preparing for the final strike against the war boss, he couldn't shake the feeling that his journey had only just begun. This world, this universe, was unlike anything he'd ever faced. But one thing remained constant. He would fight, not because he had to, but because it was the right thing to do. The settlement was quiet as dawn broke, the orange light of the alien suns creeping across the jagged landscape. Master Chief stood atop the tallest structure, scanning the horizon through his enhanced optics. The fields of ash and sparse rock formations offered little cover, but it was a vulnerability he was determined to exploit. Behind him, the villagers stirred. Under Chief's guidance, the once defeated settlement had transformed into something more resilient. Makeshift barricades had been reinforced with scavenged metal, and sentry positions had been established. The air was tense, each villager carrying the knowledge that today might bring yet another orc assault. Chief activated his comms. "Lena, report." Lena's voice crackled in his earpiece. "North perimeter secure. No movement yet. Trolls came back from last night's raid and, well, let's just say morale's better than it was." Chief allowed himself the briefest acknowledgement of their progress. "Keep watch. If anything moves, I want to know about it immediately." He climbed down from his post and approached the central square, where Garrett was organising a group of villagers. They were armed with an assortment of weapons, scavenged lasguns, homemade explosives, and a few bolt-action rifles that had likely seen better centuries. Chief's own gear was a stark contrast, his Mjolnir armour gleaming despite its recent trials. "How's it looking?" Garrett asked, his voice rough with fatigue. "Quiet," Chief replied. "Too quiet. The orcs are regrouping. It's only a matter of time before they hit us again." Garrett nodded grimly. "You've been saying that for days. Any sign of this war boss you're so worried about?" "Not yet," Chief admitted, "but he's out there, and when he comes, it won't be like the skirmishes we've seen so far." Garrett glanced at the villagers. "You think we're ready?" Chief considered the question carefully. The settlers had improved, no doubt, but their inexperience still showed in their movements and reactions. Still, they had something the orcs lacked: discipline and determination. "We're as ready as we're going to be," he said finally, "but we can't wait for them to come to us. We need to take the fight to them." Later that morning, Chief gathered his hand-picked team for the operation. Lena stood at his side, her confidence growing with every successful mission. Alongside her were 4 others: Jorik, a burly miner with a knack for explosives; Rena, a sharp-eyed scout; Dav, a wiry teenager whose speed made him ideal for hit-and-run tactics; and Harvick, a grizzled veteran of some long-forgotten war. Chief laid out the plan. "We've located an orc outpost 5 clicks to the east. It's a staging area for their assaults, and it's where they're keeping most of their vehicles. If we take it out, we'll cripple their mobility and buy the settlement time to fortify further." Jorik grinned, hefting a satchel of homemade explosives. "Sounds like my kind of job." Chief nodded. "Rena, you'll scout ahead and provide overwatch. Jorik, you'll handle demolitions. Lena, Dav, and Harvick will cover me while I secure the command tent. Any questions?" None came. The team had learned to trust Chief's leadership, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The trek to the orc outpost was uneventful, the team moving swiftly and silently through the barren landscape. As they neared their target, Rena signaled for the group to halt. She pointed to a ridge overlooking the outpost, her keen eyes having already spotted the crude fortifications and the hulking green figures patrolling them. Chief motioned for the team to take cover. Through his scope, he surveyed the site. The outpost was a sprawling mess of scrap metal, dirt-packed walls and smoking chimneys. Orc vehicles, ramshackle constructs bristling with guns, were parked in haphazard rows. At the centre, a crude tower loomed, its top adorned with the severed heads of unfortunate victims. "Looks like a dozen guards," Rena whispered, "maybe more inside." Chief formulated the plan in his head. "We'll split into 2 teams. Rena and Jorik, you take the left flank. set charges on the vehicles and make as much noise as you can. The rest of us will hit the right flank and push toward the command tower. Stick to your objectives and don't engage unless necessary." The team nodded, their nerves hidden behind determined faces. The assault began with a flash and a bang. Jorik's explosives tore through the first row of vehicles, sending shrapnel and fire into the air. Orcs scrambled in confusion, roaring and firing wildly as they searched for the source of the attack. Rena picked off targets from her perch, her aim unerring. On the right flank, Chief led the charge. He moved like a force of nature, his assault rifle barking as he dispatched the first wave of defenders. Lena and Dav followed closely, their movements coordinated as they provided covering fire. Harvick stayed back, his heavy lasgun suppressing any orcs who tried to flank them. Chief reached the base of the tower, his path marked by fallen enemies. He signaled for Lena and Dav to secure the perimeter, while he breached the command tent. The interior was a chaotic mess of maps, weapons, and crude trophies. Chief scanned the room, his HUD tagging points of interest. Then he saw it. A massive, makeshift throne at the centre of the tent, and sitting upon it was a towering figure clad in piecemeal armour, its tusked face twisted in a grin of savage amusement. The war boss. "You think you can sneak into my camp and get away with it?" the creature bellowed, rising to its full, intimidating height. It wielded a massive power claw in one hand and a brutish chain axe in the other. Chief raised his weapon but didn't fire. "You talk too much," he said calmly. The war boss roared and charged, shaking the ground with every step. Chief dodged the first swing of the power claw, his reflexes honed to perfection. He fired a burst directly into the war boss's chest. The creature's armour absorbed most of the impact. The two clashed in a brutal melee. Chief's speed and precision were pitted against the war boss's raw strength and ferocity. The fight spilled out of the tent, drawing the attention of both the orcs and the settlers. Lena's eyes widened as she saw Chief trading blows with a massive enemy. "Cover him," she shouted, rallying the others to push harder against the remaining orcs. Chief ducked under another swing and countered with a powerful punch to the war boss's side. The creature staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it grabbed Chief by the arm, its power claw sparking as it began to crush his armour. Chief gritted his teeth, using his free hand to draw his sidearm and fire point blank into the war boss's exposed face. The creature howled in pain, releasing Chief as it stumbled backward, but Chief didn't hesitate. He grabbed a fallen grenade, armed it, and hurled it directly into the war boss's open mouth. The explosion was deafening, and when the smoke cleared, the war boss lay motionless, its head reduced to a smouldering crater. With the war boss defeated, the remaining orcs fought on with a frenzy that could only be described as suicidal. Chief and the settlers didn't relent. Every last orc was brought down in the ensuing chaos, their brute resilience no match for the settlers' determination and Chief's superior tactical knowledge. When the dust settled, the outpost was silent, save for the crackle of flames from destroyed vehicles and structures. Chief surveyed the carnage. "That's all of them." Lena approached, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "We actually did it." Jorik grinned, wiping green blood from his face. "Damn right we did." As the group regrouped, a low rumble echoed across the barren landscape. Chief's enhanced optics picked out movement on the horizon. A column of figures marched in perfect formation, their uniforms stark against the ash-covered terrain. Imperial guardsmen. The soldiers, led by a grizzled commissar, entered the smouldering remains of the orc camp. The commissar, his posture rigid and his expression severe, surveyed the scene before his eyes locked on to Chief. "Impressive," the commissar said, his voice like a blade drawn across stone. "But now the Emperor demands his due. This settlement will provide conscripts and resources for the Imperium's war effort." Chief stepped forward, his stance firm. "These people just fought to survive. They're not soldiers, and they're not expendable." The commissar's eyes narrowed. You dare defy the will of the Emperor? Think carefully, soldier. You stand on the edge of heresy. The settlers tensed, their weapons at the ready. The chief didn't waver. I've fought enough battles to know when a fight isn't worth it. This settlement stays free. A tense silence fell over the camp as the two leaders faced each other, the weight of their convictions threatening to ignite a new conflict. The settlers watched anxiously, knowing that whatever happened next would shape their future. The standoff between Master Chief and the Commissar held the camp in tense silence, each side locked in a battle of wills. The Commissar's piercing gaze shifted from Chief's unwavering visor to the settlers, noting their makeshift weapons and nervous expressions. His voice broke the stillness, laced with cold authority. You wear the guise of a soldier, but I've never seen armor like yours, the Commissar said. Stepping forward, his coat swayed with the wind, and the polished aquila on his chestplate glinted in the dim light. What are you, heretic? Some Xenos abomination? Master Chief's response was as unyielding as the armor he wore. I'm a soldier, and these people are under my protection. The Commissar's lip curled in disdain. Your protection? The Emperor's will is the only protection that matters, and you will not stand in the way of his demands. Surrender the men of this settlement for conscription, or I will take them by force. Chief didn't flinch. He looked past the Commissar at the platoon of Imperial guardsmen. Their lasguns were raised, their discipline evident in their unwavering formation. Behind him, the settlers bristled with tension, their weapons trembling in inexperienced hands. No one's going anywhere, Chief said. The Commissar's expression darkened. You dare defy the Imperium? Guardsmen, take them. The soldiers surged forward, their boots crunching against the scorched ground. Chief moved like a shadow come to life, stepping into their path before they reached the settlers. His first strike disarmed the lead guardsman with a precise blow to the wrist. The lasgun clattered to the ground as the soldier stumbled back, clutching his arm in shock. Another guardsman lunged, bayonet flashing, but Chief sidestepped, catching the weapon's haft in his armoured hand. With a twist, he wrenched it free and spun, using the rifle's butt to knock the soldier to the ground. The camp erupted into chaos. Guardsmen fired wildly, their shots ricocheting harmlessly off Chief's Molnier armour. He closed the distance to each attacker with frightening speed, disabling them with calculated efficiency. A sweep of his leg sent 3 soldiers sprawling. A powerful shove sent another crashing into a barricade. Yet despite his overwhelming strength, not a single guardsman was killed. Chief's blows incapacitated, but never ended lives. Lena watched from the sidelines, her heart racing. The settlers had raised their weapons, but held their fire, stunned by the spectacle. Is he even human? She whispered. Garrett, gripping his rifle tightly, shook his head. Human or not, he's on our side. Within moments, the platoon was reduced to a disarmed, groaning heap. Only the Commissar remained standing, his hand resting on the ornate bolt pistol at his hip. His face was a mask of fury and disbelief. Enough, the Commissar bellowed. You dare humiliate the Emperor's chosen soldiers. You will pay for this insolence with your life. Chief turned to face him, his imposing silhouette framed by the smouldering remains of the Orc camp. I didn't kill your men because they were just following orders, but if you force my hand, I won't hold back. The Commissar's hand tightened on his pistol. You speak as if you're above the Emperor's judgment. Who are you to defy his will? Chief stepped closer, his voice calm but unyielding. I'm not part of your Imperium. These people aren't either. They're survivors. If you want to press this, you'll answer to me. The Commissar hesitated. The battlefield was silent, except for the crackle of dying flames and the groans of injured guardsmen. His pistol wavered. but his pride held firm. "This is heresy," he spat. "The Inquisition will hear of this. You'll burn for your defiance." Chief's visor reflected the Commissar's angry glare. "Then go, tell them whatever you want. But if you come back, bring more than words." With a snarl, the Commissar holstered his weapon and barked orders to his men. "Fall back, we're leaving." The guardsmen, bruised and battered, scrambled to their feet and retreated in disarray. The settlers watched in stunned silence as the Imperial platoon disappeared into the horizon, leaving behind only the tension that hung in the air. Garrett approached Chief cautiously. "You just made an enemy of the Imperium. Are you sure about this?" Chief's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "I've made worse enemies." Hours later, the Commissar's column reached their outpost, a fortified bunker bristling with defences. He stormed into the command centre, his anger barely contained. The room fell silent as he activated the Voxcaster, its static crackling ominously. "This is Commissar Bastian Arkov, requesting direct communication with the Ordo Hereticus." The Vox operator hesitated. "The Inquisition doesn't usually respond to—" "Do it now," Arkov snapped. The operator complied, and moments later, the cold, clipped voice of an Inquisitor filled the room. "This is Inquisitor Tial Vardis. Speak." Arkov's tone was sharp, his frustration barely masked. "Inquisitor, I have encountered a heretic leading a settlement on the outskirts of our territory. He's heavily armed, wearing advanced armor unlike anything I've ever seen. He's no ordinary renegade." "And why?" Vardis interrupted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Should this single heretic concern me? The galaxy is teeming with traitors." Arkov gritted his teeth. "This one defeated an entire platoon of guardsmen without killing a single man. He's enhanced, stronger, faster than any human has the right to be. And his armor, it's beyond anything the Mechanicus could produce." There was a pause, and when Vardis spoke again, his tone was colder. "Describe this armor." Arkov did so, recounting the sleek design, the unyielding strength, and the eerie efficiency with which its wearer moved. When he finished, the Vox was silent for a long moment. "You're certain of what you saw?" Vardis asked finally. "I am," Arkov said. "This is no ordinary heretic. Whatever he is, he's a threat to the Imperium." Vardis's voice hardened. "Prepare your outpost for my arrival. I will see this heretic myself." The Voxcaster went dead, leaving Arkov alone in the silence of the command centre. He exhaled slowly, his hands trembling as he removed his cap. "What have you brought upon us?" he muttered, staring at the darkened horizon where the settlement lay. Back at the settlement, the mood was sombre. The villagers worked tirelessly to repair their defences, their earlier victory overshadowed by the spectre of Imperial retaliation. Chief stood at the edge of the camp, his visor reflecting the distant stars. Lena approached, her voice hesitant. "You think they'll come back?" "They will," Chief said simply. She looked at him, searching for any sign of doubt behind the impassive helmet. "What will we do?" Chief turned to face her, his voice steady. "We do our duty. We prepare and we fight." The settlers' determination hardened, their resolve echoing the unshakable strength of the Spartan who stood among them. Beyond the settlement, the stars seemed to shimmer with a silent warning. The hammer of the Imperium was coming. The storm-shrouded sky over the Imperial Guard outpost mirrored Commissar Arkov's turmoil. Within the command centre, the air crackled with tension as Inquisitor Tial Vardis swept into the room, his black and crimson robes billowing. His gaunt face was etched with cold authority, and his bionic eye glowed ominously in the dim light. Behind him, marched a retinue of elite Inquisitorial stormtroopers, their carapace armor and hell guns a stark contrast to the battered guardsmen who saluted stiffly as they passed. Archov stood to attention, his face pale but resolute. "Inquisitor Vardis, welcome to our outpost." Vardis's eyes flicked to the Commissar, and then to the assembled officers. "Spare me the pleasantries. Take me to this settlement immediately. If this so-called heretic is as dangerous as you claim, we waste time standing here." "Of course, Inquisitor," Archov replied, leading the way. As they moved, he cast uneasy glances at the Inquisitor's stormtroopers, their silent, menacing presence unnerving even to a hardened Commissar. The outpost officers whispered nervously as the retinue exited the bunker, boarding a convoy of armoured vehicles. The engines roared to life, and the column set out toward the settlement. The settlement stood on the edge of a vast, charred plain. Makeshift barricades and hastily fortified positions dotted the camp. Settlers worked tirelessly, reinforcing defences under the watchful eye of the Master Chief, who stood near the perimeter, his imposing frame silhouetted against the flickering fires. The Spartan's visor reflected the approaching dust cloud of the convoy. Lena ran up to him, breathless. "They're coming." Chief turned to the settlers. "Get inside, now." The settlers hesitated, fear and defiance warring in their expressions. "Chief, inside," he repeated, his voice like steel. Reluctantly, they obeyed, retreating into the shelter of the camp. As the convoy approached, Chief stepped forward, his posture unyielding. The vehicles ground to a halt, and the Inquisition's forces disembarked. Vardis emerged, flanked by his stormtroopers and the visibly tense Archov. "Heretic," Vardis declared, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "You stand accused of defying the Emperor's will and obstructing his servants. Surrender yourself and your death will be swift." Chief's reply was measured, his tone calm. "These people are under my protection. I'm not going anywhere with you." Vardis's lip curled in disdain. "Fool, you cannot stand against the might of the Imperium. I give you one final chance. Submit or be annihilated." Chief's only response was to draw his assault rifle, its faint hum signalling readiness. The settlers watched from the shadows, their breaths held. Vardis's eyes narrowed. "So be it. Stormtroopers, subdue him." The first wave of stormtroopers advanced, hellguns blazing. Their precision was impeccable, but their shots glanced off Chief's Molnier armor, sparks flying harmlessly. He moved with surgical efficiency, closing the distance in a heartbeat. A stormtrooper raised his weapon, only for Chief to wrench it away and deliver a bone-crushing strike to the soldier's chest, sending him sprawling. A second trooper lunged, and Chief's fist met his helmet with a resounding crack, the reinforced material shattering. Chief spun, dodging a volley of shots, and hurled a flash grenade. The detonation disoriented the attackers, giving the opening to incapacitate two more with brutal precision. The stormtroopers regrouped, forming a disciplined firing line, but Chief charged, weaving through the barrage of hellgun fire. He reached the line, slamming into it like an unstoppable force. Bodies flew as his armoured shoulder met a soldier's torso, and his fist shattered another's visor. Vardis watched with mounting fury. "Bring him down. Use the heavy weapons." A second wave emerged, wielding plasma guns and flamers. The air shimmered with heat as plasma bolts streaked toward Chief. He ducked and rolled, his movements impossibly fast. A flamer's jet of fire roared toward him, but he vaulted over the attacker, landing behind them and delivering a devastating blow that crumpled the soldier's armor. The battle raged, Chief's resilience in combat prowess, an awe-inspiring spectacle. Even as he disabled soldier after soldier, the weight of numbers began to tell. He showed no signs of fatigue, but the stormtroopers' relentless assault left little room to maneuver. A plasma bolt struck his shoulder, the impact staggering him momentarily. Vardis stepped forward, his bionic eye glowing ominously. Enough of this. Deploy the null field. A device was activated, and a shimmering field enveloped the area around Chief. His movement slowed, the advanced systems of his armor faltering under the field's suppressive effects. Stormtroopers swarmed him, their blows raining down. He fought back, his strength still formidable, but the field dulled his reactions. Arkoff watched in grim silence as Chief was overwhelmed, his imposing figure finally forced to the ground. The stormtroopers restrained him with heavy chains, their breaths ragged and faces blooded. Vardis approached, his expression triumphant. "You fought well, heretic, but even you cannot defy the Emperor's will." Chief's visor turned toward the Inquisitor, his voice steady despite his predicament. "You're making a mistake." Vardis sneered. "Silence!" The settlers watched in horror as Chief was loaded onto the Inquisitorial transport. Lena's fists were clenched, tears streaming down her face. "We can't just let them take him." Garrett placed a hand on her shoulder. "He'd want us to survive. We'll wait for our chance." Aboard the Inquisition's ship, Chief's armor was secured in a containment field. Vardis studied it closely, his fingers brushing the battle-scarred surface. "Fascinating," he muttered. "This design, it's unlike anything the Mechanicus has produced, yet it bears a vague resemblance to Astartes' power armor." An adjutant stepped forward hesitantly. "Inquisitor, should we inform the Mechanicus?" Vardis's expression darkened. "Reluctantly, yes. Contact them. I want their Magos biologists and artisans to examine this armor. If this creature is some experiment gone rogue, we must uncover its origins." As the adjutant moved to comply, Vardis turned back to Chief, who sat restrained within the containment field. "You will tell me everything, heretic. Where you come from, who created you, and what your purpose is." Chief's gaze met the Inquisitor's unyielding. "You'll get nothing from me." Vardis's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We'll see." Beyond the ship's reinforced viewport, the stars stretched endlessly, their light cold and unfeeling. The settlers' camp lay far below, its people mourning the loss of their protector, but in their hearts a spark of defiance burned. They would not forget the Spartan who had stood against the Imperium itself, and neither, it seemed, would the Inquisition. The Mechanicus shuttle descended onto the Inquisition ship with mechanical precision, its crimson hull gleaming under the sterile hangar lights. A procession of robed adepts disembarked, their forms obscured by flowing garments adorned with cog motifs and trailing incense. Leading them was Magos Dominus Cyrax, a towering figure of metal and flesh whose bionic limbs clanked with each step. Servo skulls floated in his wake, scanning the area with cold, red lenses. Inquisitor Vardis met them at the edge of the hangar, flanked by his stormtroopers. His expression was one of restrained impatience. "Magos Cyrax, you are here at my request to examine a unique specimen. You will find it unlike anything recorded in the Mechanicus archives." Cyrax's voice emerged as a monotone screech, layered with the hum of a vox augment. "Your summons described anomalous technology. Such discoveries are the Omnissiah's blessing. Lead us to the subject." Vardis turned sharply, gesturing for them to follow. The group marched through the ship's labyrinthine corridors, their destination an isolated containment chamber, deep within the vessel's reinforced hull. Inside the containment chamber, Master Chief stood motionless, his armor restrained by heavy-duty servitor clamps. His visor reflected the eerie green glow of scanning arrays and Auspex devices operated by tech priests. The Spartan's posture was calm, though his silence exuded defiance. Cyrax approached, his mechadendrites whirring as they extended toward the armor. "Fascinating," he intoned. "This configuration, alloy density, energy distribution. This is not of Mechanicus origin, nor does it align with Xenos design." Vardis crossed his arms, his tone sharp. "Is it human?" The Magos turned to his adepts, who were analyzing data streams. One of them, a low-ranking engine seer, hesitated before speaking. "The biological signature within the armor is human. However, the subject displays significant augmentation, beyond baseline capabilities, and comparable to, but distinct from, Adeptus Astartes gene seed enhancements." Cyrax's mechadendrites probed further, drawing sparks from the armor's surface. Subject's modifications include skeletal reinforcement, enhanced musculature, neural augmentation, and advanced metabolic regulation. This is not Mechanicus work. Vardis's gaze darkened. So, a rogue faction has dared to meddle with a sacred template of humanity. "You will tell us who created you and why," he demanded, his eyes boring into Master Chief. But Master Chief remained silent, his visor fixed on Vardis. The Inquisitor's patience snapped. "Begin the interrogation." Electroprods sparked to life as the tech priests activated instruments designed to extract information through pain. Bolts of electricity coursed through the armor, targeting neural relay points. Chief's body jerked slightly under the assault, but his silence remained unbroken. "Impressive resilience," Cyrax noted clinically. "The nervous system withstands stimuli beyond standard tolerances. Further analysis is required." Vardis leaned closer, his voice a venomous hiss. "You will speak. Who created you? What purpose do you serve?" Chief's reply was steady and cold. "You wouldn't understand." Fury flashed across Vardis's face. "Then we'll cut the answers out of you. Magos, prepare for a vivisection." A surgical servitor rolled forward, its multi-limbed frame bristling with saws and scalpels. The machine's whirring blades descended toward Chief's restrained form. But before the first incision could be made, the ship's alarms blared, filling the chamber with a shrill, urgent wail. A voice crackled over the vox. "Warning, Xenos presence detected. Tyranid bioships have breached the system. All hands, prepare for boarding action." Vardis turned sharply, cursing under his breath. "Tyranids? Here!" The chamber's bulkhead doors hissed open as an officer sprinted in. His face was pale with fear. "Inquisitor, Termagants have infiltrated the lower decks. We're being overrun." Chief's voice cut through the chaos. "Release me." Vardis whirled to face him. "You're in no position to make demands, heretic." "You're out of time," Chief said. "You need me. Release me, and I'll help you fight them." The Inquisitor hesitated, his pride warring with practicality. The screams of dying men echoed through the corridors, accompanied by the chittering of Tyranid horrors. Vardis growled and turned to his stormtroopers. "Unshackle him, but if he tries anything, kill him." The servitor clamps released, and Chief stepped forward, rolling his shoulders as the weight of his armor settled back into place. He turned to Vardis. "Stay out of my way." The lower decks were a war zone. Termagants swarmed through corridors, their claws and bioweapons tearing through guardsmen and crew alike. Chief led the charge, his assault rifle barking as he cut down wave after wave of the alien creatures. Each shot was precise, each movement calculated to maximize efficiency. A stormtrooper shouted, "Behind you!" Chief spun, grabbing a leaping Termagant mid-air and slamming it into the ground with bone-shattering force. He followed up with a grenade, its explosion incinerating a cluster of the creatures. Vardis and Cyrax observed from a vantage point, the Inquisitor's expression one of reluctant admiration. "He's more effective than an entire platoon of stormtroopers," Vardis admitted begrudgingly. Cyrax's mechadendrites twitched. "Such efficiency is extraordinary. The Omnissiah's hand may yet be at work here." Chief pressed forward, rallying the surviving soldiers. "Form a line. Hold this corridor." The guardsmen obeyed, their morale bolstered by his presence. Under his command, their fire discipline improved, and the Xenos advance began to falter. A deafening roar shook the ship as a Carnifex burst through a bulkhead, its massive frame bristling with bioweaponry. The beast charged, scattering soldiers like ragdolls. Chief sprinted to meet it, dodging a swipe of its massive claws. He vaulted onto its back, driving a combat knife into its armoured carapace. The Carnifex roared, bucking wildly, but Chief held firm, targeting vulnerable joints. With a final, brutal twist, he severed its spine, and the creature collapsed in a lifeless heap. The surviving Tyranids were routed, their numbers too few to maintain the assault. The ship's defenders began the grim task of clearing the corridors of alien corpses and tending to their wounded. Chief stood amidst the carnage, his armour streaked with blood and gore. Vardis approached, flanked by his stormtroopers. The Inquisitor's expression was unreadable. "You've proven yourself useful," Vardis admitted, "but this changes nothing. You will answer for your defiance." Chief turned to face him, his voice calm and unwavering. "What now?" Vardis hesitated, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Beyond the viewpoint, the Tyranid bioships loomed, their shadowy forms a reminder that the battle was far from over. The smell of scorched flesh and the acrid tang of melted metal filled the corridors of the Inquisition's ship. The battle against the Tyranids had been brutal, but they had survived, largely thanks to Master Chief's combat prowess. Now, amidst the ruined bulkheads and the bodies of slain Xenos, Inquisitor Kale Vardis stood before the armoured warrior who had just saved his ship. His expression was unreadable, though tension crackled in the air like a primed plasma coil. "You've proven yourself useful," Vardis admitted, his voice measured, "but this changes nothing, and you will answer for your defiance." The stormtroopers flanked him tightened their grips on their weapons, shifting uneasily as their leader's command registered. "Seize him." The words hung heavy in the silence. None of the stormtroopers moved immediately. Their gazes flickered between one another, their hesitation evident. This warrior, clad in armour unlike any they had ever seen, had stood beside them. He had held the line when the Xenos had threatened to overrun them. How could they now turn their weapons on him? Master Chief assessed the situation instantly. He saw the wavering resolve in their stances, the way their eyes betrayed their reluctance. He had a small sliver of time, and he intended to use it. With practiced efficiency, his hand shot out, plucking a flash grenade from the belt of the nearest stormtrooper. The movement was too swift for them to react in time. A blinding explosion of white light filled the chamber, and the stormtroopers staggered, momentarily disorientated. Master Chief moved. In a burst of speed, he lunged past the Inquisitor, his enhanced reflexes guiding him through the chaos. He knew the ship's layout from their previous march through its corridors, and his objective was clear: the hangar. Bursting into the hangar bay, Chief scanned the area. Most of the ships were too large or heavily damaged, but Mechanicus transport, its hull marred by battle scars, remained semi-functional. It would have to do. Alarms blared behind him as stormtroopers recovered and gave chase. Chief vaulted into the shuttle's cockpit, overriding its security protocols with brute force and rapid input sequences. The engines sputtered to life, coughing smoke, but he had no choice. Vardis stormed into the hangar, eyes blazing with fury. "Stop him," he roared. A handful of bolter rounds ricocheted off the shuttle's hull as Chief yanked the controls. The craft lurched forward and then rocketed out of the hangar into the dark abyss of space. He pushed the engines to their limits, knowing the Inquisition's vessel was damaged from the Tyranid assault. Pursuit would be unlikely, but still, he knew they wouldn't forget him. Time blurred as the shuttle drifted through the cold embrace of deep space. The vessel's systems were failing. Power fluctuations flickered across the dashboard. Oxygen levels dipped dangerously, and the engines sputtered with each passing day. Rationing supplies became an exercise in survival, and fatigue gnawed at him like a persistent enemy. A soldier, even a Spartan, could only endure so much isolation. Days turned into weeks. His mind, trained for combat and survival, found itself grappling with a new kind of battle. Waiting. With no destination, no mission, and only the endless void surrounding him, doubt began to creep in. Would he die here, floating endlessly through a galaxy that was not his own? But then, salvation appeared on the edge of his scanners. A massive vessel, its design sleek yet unfamiliar, loomed before him. Symbols adorned its hull, different from the Gothic engravings of the Imperium. It was unlike anything he had encountered, yet it moved with purpose, its scanning arrays sweeping over his shuttle. A transmission crackled through his failing comms. "Unknown vessel, you are adrift. Prepare to be boarded." Chief clenched his fists, muscles coiling. He had no idea who these newcomers were, but recent experiences had made him wary. If this was another branch of the Imperium, he would be ready. The shuttle shuddered as docking clamps latched onto its hull. The airlock hissed open, and figures stepped inside. Sleek armor, advanced weaponry, and a presence that exuded precision. The Tial. Chief remained still as the boarding party fanned out, their weapons raised but not fired. They were cautious, studying him with curious eyes. One of them, a fire warrior, approached. "You are human," he stated, more observation than question. Chief did not respond immediately. He could see they were not hostile, at least, not yet. Moments later, another figure entered, clad in an ornate battlesuit that marked her as a leader. The warriors around her straightened in immediate reverence. Commander Shadowsun. She studied him, her piercing gaze analytical. "You are not of the Imperium," she said finally. Chief tilted his head slightly. "Not of this Imperium." That intrigued her. She motioned to her warriors. "Take him to medical. Ensure he is stable." Despite his wariness, Chief knew he had little choice. His body was running on empty, his armor's systems barely operational. With a reluctant nod, he allowed himself to be led away. After a brief medical examination confirmed his augmented nature, Chief was summoned to Shadowsun's quarters. The chamber was sleek, minimalist, devoid of the Imperium's heavy, ornate designs. The atmosphere was one of quiet efficiency. Shadowsun stood before him, arms crossed. "You fought against the Imperium." "I fought for survival," Chief corrected. She studied him for a long moment. "You are human, but your kind are different. Not of the Imperium, yet enhanced beyond normal limits. Explain." Chief exhaled, crossing his arms. "I come from another world, another war. Somehow I was transported here." A flicker of intrigue crossed her features. "You have seen the Imperium, fought alongside them. What is your judgment?" He thought of the brutality, The fanaticism, the unrelenting cruelty of the Inquisition. He thought of Vardis and the Mechanicus, so quick to dissect him without understanding. I want no part of it. A smile ghosted Shadowsun's lips. Then perhaps you have a place elsewhere. She began to explain the philosophy of the Tau and of the greater good, a unifying cause beyond the oppressive rule of the Imperium, a vision of progress, unity, and expansion. You are a warrior without a nation, she said. I offer you a purpose. Fight for us. Fight for something greater than survival. Chief considered her words. He had spent his life as a soldier, fighting wars not of his choosing. But here, in this galaxy, he was alone. The Imperium saw him as a threat. The Tyranid sought only to consume. Perhaps this was his only real option. Finally, he nodded. I'll fight with you. Shadowsun's expression remained neutral, but there was approval in her gaze. Then welcome, Master Chief, to the Tau Empire. Weeks passed aboard the Tau warship, a sleek vessel unlike anything Master Chief had encountered before. The sterile corridors and advanced technology felt alien to him, but the discipline and efficiency of the Tau Empire was unmistakable. Unlike the Imperium, which was steeped in religious zealotry and archaic traditions, the Tau thrived on progress and tactical precision. Commander Shadowsun had taken a particular interest in him, not just as a curiosity, but as a potential asset. Each day she briefed him extensively on the enemies of the Tau, the Orcs, brutal, war-hungry beasts whose strength lay in sheer numbers and mindless savagery. The Imperium, a behemoth of bureaucracy and zealotry that saw all outsiders as heretics to be purged. But above all, she focused on the Tyranids. A holographic projection displayed swarms of the nightmarish Xenos, endless tides of chitin, claws, and bioorganic weaponry, their advance like a tide of death washing over entire planets. They are unlike any foe, Shadowsun explained, her tone grim. They do not feel fear, they do not negotiate, they only consume. Master Chief studied the footage carefully. He had fought them aboard the Inquisition ship, and had seen firsthand their relentless hunger. He had witnessed how they overwhelmed their prey with sheer numbers and unprecedented adaptability. I encountered them recently, he said finally, his voice even. They nearly tore through an Imperial warship. Shadowsun nodded. And now they are here. She gestured to a nearby star system on the map. This planet, Tial, is under siege. A Tau colony lightly defended. We have a fleet in orbit, but we are losing ground. Our warriors are holding, but without reinforcement, they will fall. Chief's expression hardened. Then take me there. Shadowsun tilted her head, her eyes analyzing him. And what do you need? He met her gaze. A weapon. The drop pod screamed through the atmosphere, its reinforced plating glowing hot as it pierced the sky. Inside, Master Chief checked his gear. A Tau plasma rifle, pulse grenades, and an experimental shoulder-mounted rail cannon. The Tau engineers had done their best to adapt their technology for his use, crafting armor enhancements that integrated seamlessly with his Mjolnir system. The moment the pod doors blew open, he leaped into the chaos of war. The battlefield was a nightmare of churning death, ruined Tau outposts, and endless waves of Tyranids. A squad of fire warriors crouched behind a barricade, their weapons firing in disciplined bursts against the oncoming swarm. When they saw him land, their expressions flickered between awe and disbelief. Shazla, with me, Chief ordered, his voice cutting through the cacophony of battle. The fire warriors hesitated for only a moment, before snapping to attention, falling in beside him. Together, they advanced, cutting down the first wave of Tyranids with precise, lethal efficiency. Pulse rounds streaked through the air, tearing into chitinous hides, while Chief's plasma rifle burned through the larger beasts in bursts of white-hot energy. A Carnifex barreled toward them, its massive claws raised to cleave them in two, but Chief reacted instantly, his shoulder-mounted rail cannon locking onto the target. A deafening crack split the air as the round tore through the Carnifex's skull, leaving nothing but a ruined carcass collapsing to the ground. "Move forward," he commanded. "Push them back." The Tau warriors followed his lead, their morale bolstered by his presence. They carved a path through the Tyranids, advancing where they had once been forced to retreat. The battle began to turn in their favour, until the ground began to shake. A thunderous roar echoed across the battlefield. The fire warriors froze as a shadow fell over them. On the horizon, an abomination of Flet and Chitin rose, an enormous bio-titan, its massive form towering over the war zone. Multiple eyes gleamed with mindless hunger, and rows of bone-like cannons protruded from its armoured hide. Panic rippled through the Tau ranks. "We must fall back," one of the fire warriors shouted. "We don't have the firepower to bring it down." Master Chief, however, remained unfazed, his voice cut through the fear. "What's the biggest gun we have?" One of the Tau pointed skyward. "The orbital railgun, but we need to get close enough to mark it." Chief's visor locked onto the beast. He gripped his weapon tighter. "Then let's get close." Without hesitation, Master Chief broke into a sprint, the fire warriors scrambling to follow. Pulse rifle fire rained down on the bio-titan's legs, but it was like shooting pebbles at a mountain. The beast roared, massive claws swinging in an attempt to swat them like insects. Chief dodged with inhuman reflexes, rolling beneath a crashing limb as it pulverized the earth where he had stood just moments before. They reached an elevated outcrop, the perfect vantage point. Chief motioned for a fire warrior to deploy the targeting beacon. The Tau worked quickly, aligning the coordinates. "Target locked," the fire warrior confirmed. "The railgun is primed." The bio-titan turned, massive tendrils writhing, sensing the threat. It opened its maw, gathering an energy surge for a devastating bioplasma blast. "Fire!" Chief roared into his comms. From the void of space, a single railgun round screamed towards the surface, faster than the eye could follow. The moment stretched into eternity. Then, impact. The bio-titan's chest exploded in a cataclysmic eruption of gore and shattered armor. A shockwave tore through the battlefield, knocking even Master Chief back. Chitin, bone, and acidic ichor rained from the sky. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Tau warriors erupted into cheers. "Victory for the greater good," they cried. Chief wiped the gore from his visor and surveyed the field. The remaining Tyranids, leaderless, scattered in disarray. The battle was won. As the last remnants of the swarm were mopped up, Shadow Sun's voice crackled over the comms. "Impressive work, Spartan." Chief exhaled, watching as the sun began to rise over the ruined colony. He had fought countless battles across different worlds, but this one had been different. Not just survival, not just another mission. For the first time in a long while, he had fought for something greater. He keyed his comms. "Where to next?" Shadow Sun's smile was almost audible. "I think we can find you another challenge." Master Chief stood in the command chamber of the Tau warship, staring at the holographic projection before him. It displayed the galaxy in haunting clarity, a vast ocean of stars stretching out into infinity. Shadow Sun stood beside him, her arms crossed and her eyes sharp with contemplation. The recent battle had been won, but the war was far from over. "The Tyranids," Chief muttered, observing the countless red markers that represented their swarms. Where do they come from? Shadowsun exhaled, folding her hands behind her back. No one truly knows, she admitted. They are extra-galactic. They come from beyond the void, outside our galaxy's reaches. Chief studied the display in silence. The Tyranids weren't just another enemy. They were a force of nature, a tide that could not be reasoned with and could not be stopped, not permanently. They're controlled, Shadowsun continued, shifting the display. A single, ominous icon appeared at the center of the Tyranid horde. A hive mind, a supreme intelligence guiding them all. Chief's eyes narrowed. Where is it? Shadowsun shook her head. We do not know. If we did, every fleet, every weapon of the Tau Empire would be pointed at it. Then let's find it. Shadowsun turned to him, her expression unreadable. And then what, Spartan? Even if we knew where it was, even if the combined might of the Tau Empire was brought to bear, we don't know if we have the firepower to stop it. Chief said nothing. He had faced impossible odds before. He had survived against overwhelming enemies, but something about the Tyranids unsettled him in a way few foes had. They weren't just an enemy. They were an apocalypse waiting to happen. Then, the alarm blared. A Tau officer turned sharply from his station. Commander Shadowsun, our sensors detect an incoming Imperial vessel. Shadowsun's gaze hardened. Class? Dauntless class light cruiser, the officer responded. They're hailing us. Shadowsun's lips pressed into a thin line. Patch them through. The hollow display flickered, and an imposing figure materialized before them. Inquisitor Vardis. His face was a mask of cold fury, his golden-trimmed armor gleaming under the ship's dim light. His eyes locked onto Shadowsun, and then shifted to Master Chief. Surrender the fugitive immediately, Vardis ordered, his voice like a blade. Master Chief is a wanted criminal of the Imperium. If you release him now, we will leave the sector. If not, he leaned forward, his expression darkening. We will board your ship and kill you all. A hush fell over the chamber. Vardis continued. You are outmatched, Tau. A squad of Ultramarines accompanies us, true warriors of the Emperor. They arrived shortly after the Spartans' betrayal to salvage what remained of this stranded Inquisition vessel. Now they are here to retrieve what belongs to us. Master Chief's muscles tensed. He knew what was coming next. You are no match for the Emperor's angels, Vardis declared. Hand him over, or be destroyed. Shadowsun's reply was ice cold. He is one of us. Vardis's lips curled into a smirk. Then so be it. First salvo of the Imperial assault struck like a thunderclap. The Tau warship's shields flared as lance batteries and macro cannons battered its sleek hull. Shadowsun's crew returned fire, ion cannons lashing out in brilliant arcs, searing into the Imperium cruiser's armour. Turrets on both ships roared as the vessels weaved around each other in a deadly waltz, exchanging brutal firepower. Explosions ripped through the void as smaller escort ships darted through the battlefield, engaged in their own duels of plasma and bolter fire. Then, the breach alarm blared. Commander, a Tau officer shouted. An enemy boarding drill has breached the hull. 4 confirmed Adeptus Astartes are aboard. But Master Chief was already moving. The corridors of the Tau warship trembled with the impact as the boarding drill embedded itself deep. A moment later, a deafening screech of tearing metal filled the air as the drill's maw twisted open, disgorging 4 massive figures clad in cobalt power armor. The Ultramarines. Tau fire warriors opened fire, but the Space Marines advanced relentlessly, bolter rounds shredding through them with merciless efficiency. The corridors became a bloodbath as the superhuman warriors carved through the Tau ranks like scythes through wheat. Chief rounded a corner, just in time to see one of the massive warriors crush a fire warrior's skull with his gauntlet. The Spartan charged. The Space Marine turned, towering over him. "You're shorter than I expected." Chief didn't reply. He struck first. His fist slammed into the Marine's helmet, staggering the warrior slightly. The Ultramarine retaliated with terrifying speed, swinging a gauntleted fist at Chief's head. He barely ducked in time as the strike dented the bulkhead behind him. They clashed with earth-shaking force, exchanging blows that could break bones and shatter armor. Chief was fast, his movements honed by years of war, but the Space Marine was something else, stronger, nearly as fast, and utterly relentless. A gauntleted hand caught Chief by the throat, hoisting him off the ground. The Marine's grip tightened. "You fight well, but you are nothing before the Emperor's might." The Marine raised his combat knife for a killing blow. A sharp crack split the air. A railgun round punched through the Marine's helmet, obliterating his skull in an instant. The massive warrior crumped lifelessly to the deck. Shadowsun lowered her rifle, stepping into view. Chief coughed, regaining his footing. He was tough. Shadowsun tossed him a Tial rifle. 3 more. Chief caught it, checked the charge, and nodded. Shadowsun hit the control panel, the bulkhead hissing open. The 3 remaining Space Marines turned toward them, bolters raised. The battle wasn't over yet. The instant the bulkhead hissed open, Master Chief and Shadowsun moved as one. Unleashing a storm of plasma and hypervelocity rounds, Shadowsun's pulse rifle sent streams of blue energy streaking through the dimly lit corridor, while Chief's borrowed Tial rifle barked out bursts of searing plasma. The Ultramarines advanced through the onslaught, bolter fire thundering in response. The corridors erupted with explosions as mass reactive rounds detonated against bulkheads, sending shrapnel and sparks flying in every direction. Chief dove for cover behind a reinforced strut as a bolter round slammed into the metal beside his head, warping the surface with sheer force. Shadowsun rolled into position behind a support beam, narrowly avoiding a round that vaporized the air where she had stood a second before. "They're too precise," Shadowsun hissed over comms. "We won't hold out much longer." Chief's mind worked in overdrive, analyzing every angle, every movement. The Ultramarines were advancing methodically. Their fire was disciplined, and their armor absorbed most of the damage. This wasn't just a fight, it was a purge. "Our only chance is to overwhelm them," Chief said, reloading with a practiced motion, one at a time. Shadowsun's helmet visor glinted under the emergency lights. "Then let's move." Chief pivoted, launching forward in a blur of motion, unleashing a precise barrage at the lead Ultramarine. Shadowsun mirrored his actions, her pulse rifle singing in harmony. The Marine staggered under the relentless assault, ceramite plating glowing red-hot from the concentrated fire. With a final burst, Shadowsun struck true. Her shot punched through a weakened plate, and the massive warrior collapsed, smoke rising from his ruined armor. The second Marine roared, charging through the chaos with a chainsword raised. Chief met him head-on, ducking low to avoid a wild swing before slamming an armored boot into the Marine's knee, destabilizing him. Shadowsun capitalized on the opening, a precise shot tearing through his exposed side. Chief followed up with brutal efficiency, gripping the Marine's helmet and slamming his skull into the bulkhead with enough force to crack the plasteel. The warrior crumpled, unmoving. Only one remained. The final Ultramarine stood resolute, bolter held steady. He knew he was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, but he did not yield. Chief and Shadowsun leveled their weapons at him, the tension in the corridor thick as smoke. "Your name," Chief demanded. The warrior's piercing blue eyes burned with defiance behind his helmet's lenses. "Titus," he said. Titus stood motionless, his massive form casting a shadow over the dimly lit corridor. His bolter remained level, unwavering despite the brutal skirmish that had just claimed his battle brothers. Chief, battered and bruised from the fight, kept his rifle trained on the ultramarine, his finger hovering over the trigger. The silence between them was deafening. "You are a heretic," Titus finally said, his voice a low growl through his helmet's vox. "A traitor to the Emperor's will." Chief exhaled, gripping his rifle tighter. "I'm not your enemy. I never was. I don't belong to your Imperium. I was transported here against my will. I don't know how, I don't know why, but I do know one thing. I only fought because your people made me. I defended myself." Titus narrowed his eyes. "That is not what I was told. The Inquisitor briefed me that you were a dangerous rogue, seeking to undermine the Imperium." Chief let out a dry chuckle. "Did he tell you that before or after he threatened to kill me and everyone around me? Because the way I see it, I was just trying to survive." Titus hesitated, his stance shifting ever so slightly. He was a warrior, bred and trained for battle, but he was not a mindless zealot. The Ultramarines prided themselves on discipline, on wisdom, and in Chief's words, he sensed no deception, only conviction. Shadowsun, standing just behind Chief, watched the exchange carefully. She could see the briefest flicker of uncertainty cross Titus's expression. Chief lowered his rifle slightly, not enough to be defenseless, but enough to show he meant what he said. "I don't want to fight anymore. The real threats to your Imperium, to your universe, are out there." He pointed to the holographic display on the wall, which still showed the Tyranid horde encroaching upon the sector. "I want to help." Titus was silent for a long moment. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I believe you." Chief let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "But," Titus raised his bolter again, the moment of reprieve vanishing, "I have my orders, and I am duty-bound to carry them out. Stand down. Come with me." Chief's expression hardened. So be it. The Spartan lunged. Titus reacted with blinding speed, sidestepping the strike and bringing his gauntleted fist down like a hammer. Chief barely managed to duck, but the force of the blow cracked the metal plating beneath him. Chief countered with a vicious uppercut, his fist slamming into Titus's jawplate, sending the Ultramarine staggering back a step. But Titus recovered instantly, driving his knee into Chief's gut with enough force to dent his armor. Chief stumbled back, gasping as the air was forced from his lungs. Titus seized the moment, slamming his elbow into Chief's helmet, sending him crashing against the bulkhead. The world spun, pain blooming across his skull. Before he could recover, Titus grabbed him by the throat, lifting him effortlessly off the ground. "You fight well," Titus said, his grip tightening. "But you are not a space marine. You are not the Emperor's chosen. You cannot win." Chief struggled, but Titus was stronger, faster, and relentless. The Ultramarine drew back his free hand, forming a fist that could shatter ceramite. Then, a sharp crack split the air. A pulse round struck Titus's leg, sending him staggering. He released Chief, who dropped to the ground coughing. Shadowsun, standing a few meters away, leveled her rifle again. Chief wasted no time. He surged forward, delivering a brutal palm strike to Titus's exposed wound. The Ultramarine grunted in pain, but before he could retaliate, Chief grabbed his arm and twisted, throwing the massive warrior off balance. With a final, thunderous kick, Chief sent Titus crashing through the bulkhead door and sealed it behind him. "We need to go," Shadowsun shouted. Chief nodded, already sprinting toward the evac corridors. The ship trembled violently as another barrage from the Imperial vessel struck home. Sparks rained from the ceiling, Consoles exploded from power surges. "Commander," a voice crackled over Shadowsun's comms. "Our engines are failing. More Imperium ships are inbound. We have to evacuate." Shadowsun cursed under her breath. "Set the ship to self-destruct. We can't let the Imperium take it." "Understood. Initiating sequence. You have 5 minutes." Chief and Shadowsun sprinted through the dying ship, reaching the last escape pod as emergency sirens blared. Fire raged through the corridors. The vessel groaned as its structure began to fail. They barely made it inside before the hatch sealed shut. With a violent lurch, the pod ejected, hurtling toward the nearby planet below. Through the viewport, Chief watched as the Tial warship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, taking several smaller Imperial vessels with it. The pod entered the atmosphere, heat shielding glowing red as they descended. Below them, a vast, uncharted world stretched out. Mountains, forests, endless plains of darkened rock. "Where are we?" Chief asked. Shadowsun checked the readings. "Unknown, but we're alive." The pod crashed into the surface, skidding across the rocky terrain before finally coming to a halt. Chief and Shadowsun emerged, their weapons ready, scanning their surroundings. The air was thin, but breathable. The landscape barren, yet eerily quiet. Meanwhile, in the dark reaches of space, beyond the Imperium's watchful eye, reality began to twist. A massive rift, a swirling vortex of crackling energy, tore open in the void. From its depths emerged a Covenant warship, its sleek, violet hull gleaming against the abyss. But something was wrong. The ship's lights flickered erratically, and a sickly green glow pulsed from within. Deep inside, grotesque forms writhed and slithered, reshaping the once proud vessel into something unholy. The Flood had found a new host, a new vessel, a new world to consume, and it was only the beginning. Titus stood in the war-scarred halls of the Inquisitorial ship. His bolter rested at his side, but his fury was barely contained. The battle against the Tau had been costly, his battle brothers reduced to corpses in the name of an operation that now felt hollow. He stormed into the command chamber, his boots striking the steel floor with a force that echoed throughout the silent room. Inquisitor Vardis sat upon his ornate chair, his bionic eye gleaming in the dim light of the chamber. He did not flinch at Titus's arrival, merely steepled his fingers, watching the Ultramarine with a calculated gaze. "You return alone, Captain," Vardis observed. "Your mission was to retrieve the anomaly, not let it slip through our grasp." Titus stepped forward, slamming his gauntleted fist onto the table. "My brothers are dead. Dead because of a lie. Who attacked first, Inquisitor? Was it him or us?" Vardis remained impassive. "That is irrelevant." Titus's voice was low and dangerous. "Irrelevant? It isn't to me. You told me he was a heretic, a rogue seeking to undermine the Imperium, but he is no such thing. He is a warrior, one who did not seek conflict with us. He defended himself when we gave him no choice, and now my battle brothers are gone." Vardis sighed, rubbing his temple. "You have always been a troublesome one, Titus, always questioning when you should obey. Yes, the being known as Master Chief appeared out of nowhere, displaced from his own reality. Yes, he is enhanced, remarkably so, in ways not unlike our own Astartes. We must secure that knowledge for the Imperium If we do not, it could fall into the hands of our enemies. Titus scowled. At what cost? You would sacrifice warriors of the Imperium for your own ambitions. Before Vardis could respond, the chamber door slid open with a hiss, and an Imperial officer stepped inside, his expression grim. Lord Inquisitor, Captain, we have an incoming vessel. It is unlike anything we've encountered before. Titus turned sharply. What do you mean, unlike anything? The officer swallowed. It bears no recognizable markings. Its hull is warped, unnatural. Our scans indicate an unknown Xenos presence aboard. It is approaching rapidly. Vardis stood, his face darkening. Ready the weapons. If it does not respond to hails, destroy it. Titus and the officer moved swiftly to the bridge. Through the observation windows, they could see the oncoming ship. A twisted Covenant vessel. Its once sleek design now corrupted with grotesque growths pulsating across its surface. A sickly green glow emanated from its hull, flickering like a dying star. Open fire, Titus commanded. The Imperial vessel unleashed a storm of plasma and macro-cannon fire, hammering into the twisted ship. Explosions rippled across its hull, yet it pressed on, closing the distance with unnatural speed. It's still coming, an officer shouted. Brace for impact, Vardis bellowed. The flood-infested warship latched onto the Imperium vessel with sickly tendrils of biomass, digging into the hull like living parasites. Metal groaned and ruptured as boarding pods burst open, spilling their grotesque contents into the ship. The first wave of guardsmen barely had time to scream before they were overwhelmed. The infection spread like wildfire, twisting flesh and bone into monstrous new forms. A grotesque hybrid of human and flood slammed into the bulkheads, tearing through soldiers as if they were paper. The halls became a nightmare of writhing, mutating bodies. Guardsmen screamed as their bodies were consumed and reshaped in seconds. Pulsing sacks of biomass began to spread along the corridors, birthing even more horrors with each passing moment. Titus did not retreat. Bolter roaring, he cut through the oncoming tide, each explosive round reducing a flood-infected guardsman to pulp. He moved like a force of nature, smashing through the abominations with his fists when his bolter ran dry. One of the larger infected, a twisted fusion of multiple bodies, its limbs elongating into sharpened claws, lunged at him. But Titus caught its wrist, the strength of his Astartes-enhanced frame holding firm as he twisted the appendage clean off and drove his power fist into its chest. The creature let out a shriek before its malformed ribcage collapsed inward. More of them poured in. A smaller form leapt onto his back, its tendrils wrapping around his armor. Titus roared, slamming himself against the bulkhead to dislodge it before crushing its skull beneath his boot. His armor was beginning to corrode where the twisted biomass touched, and for the first time he realized that even an Astartes was not immune to their infection. "We cannot hold them," an officer shrieked. "They're everywhere." Vardis snarled. "We must abandon ship. Get to the escape pods now." Titus fired round after round, the blessed ammunition of the Adeptus Astartes tearing through the nightmarish horrors. But for every one that fell, two more took its place. The corridors became a slaughterhouse, filled with the screams of the dying and the wretched moans of the flood. Reaching the escape bay, Titus punched the launch controls, forcing the last remaining pod to eject. As it rocketed away from the doomed vessel, he could see the flood ship engulfing his own, consuming it like a grotesque parasite. His jaw clenched. This was an enemy unlike any the Imperium had ever faced. The pod hurtled through the void before entering the atmosphere of the planet below. The heat shields flared as they descended, until at last they crashed into the rocky terrain with a thunderous impact. Silence followed. Then the hatch hissed open. Titus and Vardis stepped out, bolters raised, scanning their surroundings. The world was barren, jagged cliffs stretching toward a darkened sky. The air was cold, and the silence oppressive. Then a voice cut through the quiet. "Welcome to the planet." Titus turned sharply, his weapon trained on the source. Standing before him was Master Chief, his Mjolnir armor gleaming under the pale light. Beside him, Shadow Sun stood poised, her weapon aimed at Vardis. Titus met Chief's gaze. Neither lowered their weapon. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, Chief gestured toward the smoking wreckage of their pod. "Looks like we have a common problem." Titus exhaled, lowering his bolter slightly. "For now. But this doesn't change what's between us." Chief nodded. "No. But it means we need to deal with what's coming first." In the distance, the twisted flood vessel loomed on the horizon, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Titus stood atop a jagged ridge, his bolter locked and loaded, watching the horizon with grim determination. The flood vessel loomed in the distance, its grotesque, pulsating form exuding an unnatural malice. It had embedded itself into the land like a festering wound, birthing horrors that skittered and slithered across the rocky expanse. The sky above was dark, choked with ominous clouds, and the air was thick with the scent of corruption. Master Chief stood beside him, silent as a statue, scanning the approaching monstrosities through his HUD. Shadow Sun and Vardis remained behind them, setting up their defensive perimeter. The Tau commander moved with practiced efficiency, salvaging what she could from the escape pod, which contained a basic cache of weapons, ammo, and drones. Shadow Sun methodically began placing the automated drones and energy barriers to create kill zones, while Vardis muttered prayers to the Emperor under his breath. Titus turned to Chief, his piercing blue eyes meeting the Spartan's golden visor. "Have you fought these creatures before?" Master Chief gave a slight nod. "Yes, they're from my world. We call them the Flood." Titus clenched his jaw. "And how did your people defeat them?" "We didn't." Chief's voice was grim. "We contained them, barely. The Flood consume everything. They infect and spread like wildfire. If we don't stop them now, they'll overrun this world, and then your entire galaxy." Titus exhaled slowly, gripping his bolter tighter. "Then we hold here. We buy time. We fight." "Agreed," Chief said, checking his assault rifle. Shadow Sun approached, her pulse rifle gleaming under the dim light. "The first wave will reach us in minutes. My drones will thin their numbers, but it won't be enough. We must strike hard and fast." Vardis scoffed. "Filthy Xenos machinery. The Emperor protects." Titus ignored him, turning instead to the towering Spartan. "You and I will hold the front. Shadow Sun, you provide covering fire with Vardis." Chief nodded. "Understood." The first wave of the flood poured over the ridge, a mass of grotesque, chittering creatures, their bodies twisted mockeries of former humans and Xenos alike. Infection forms scuttled ahead, seeking new hosts, while combat forms, horrifically mutated soldiers, charged with inhuman speed. Towering, hulking abominations loomed at their back, their warped bodies dripping with biomass, their swollen frames bristling with tendrils that pulsed with unnatural life. Titus and Chief opened fire in unison. Explosive bolter rounds and tungsten core assault rifle bullets tore through the abominations, rupturing twisted flesh and bone. The first rank of Flood collapsed, but more surged forward. Shadow Sun's drones hovered overhead, raining precision plasma fire into the horde, burning through twisted limbs and gnarled torsos. Vardis unleashed bursts from his bolt pistol, each shot guided by righteous fury. A tide of infection forms scuttled forward, their bulbous bodies writhing. "Burn them," Titus roared. Shadow Sun responded with a sweeping plasma barrage, reducing dozens to smouldering husks. Chief primed a fragmentation grenade and tossed it into the thick of them. The explosion tore through the mass, but still more came. A monstrous Flood warrior lunged at Titus, its mutated limbs thrashing wildly. He met its charge with a brutal strike from his power fist, crushing its skull into pulp. Another combat form leaped onto his back, its tendrils grasping for purchase. Snarling, Titus slammed himself against a jagged rock face, shattering the parasite against the stone. Master Chief moved like a ghost, sidestepping lunges, planting headshots with pinpoint accuracy. He caught a leaping infection form mid-air, crushing it under his boot, then pivoted to unleash a grenade into the heart of a charging horde. The explosion sent limbs and bile flying. A combat form wielded a jagged, mutated blade, swung at him, but Chief ducked, then countered with a precise burst to its head, dropping it instantly. A massive, tank-like being charged from the ridge, its bulk shaking the ground with every step. But Chief and Titus moved as one. Chief leapt onto its back, driving his combat knife into a writhing mass of exposed flesh, while Titus rammed his power fist into its bloated gut, rupturing its diseased innards in a fountain of corruption. The beast roared, thrashing violently, but the two warriors did not relent. Chief unloaded his rifle into the creature's skull, while Titus drove his boot against its knee, shattering it. With a final savage strike, the monstrosity collapsed in a heap of twitching flesh. Still, the Flood pressed on. More abominations clawed their way forward, their numbers seemingly endless. Shadow Sun's drones flickered, and overwhelmed by the sheer volume of enemies. Vardis bellowed litanies of hatred, cutting down infected Imperial soldiers who had once been loyal men of the Imperium. The battlefield became a maelstrom of blood and fire, bodies torn apart and reanimated within seconds. The stench of decay was overpowering. A fresh wave of combat forms emerged, some of them disturbingly intact, their armour still bearing the sigils of their past lives. One, a former space marine, let out a horrific, gargled growl as it raised a corrupted bolter. Before it could fire, Chief and Titus moved in tandem. Chief threw a plasma grenade, its blue glow sticking to the creature's chest, while Titus delivered a bone-crushing blow that sent it staggering. The grenade detonated, reducing the abomination to a burning pile of ash. For what felt like an eternity, the battlefield was chaos incarnate. The warriors fought with relentless ferocity, carving a path of destruction through the seemingly endless swarm. But at last, the tide began to wane. The last of the Flood forces shrieked as they fell beneath a final salvo from Shadow Sun and Vardis. The ground was littered with the mangled remains of Flood creatures, their twisted forms steaming under the cold air. The once barren land was now a slaughterhouse, coated in blood and fragmented corpses. Titus and Chief stood amongst the carnage, breathing heavily. "That was just a scouting force," Chief muttered. "Only a fraction of their true strength." Titus wiped Flood blood from his armour. "It seems whatever brought you here is still open. If it means more of these abominations, then we must find it and destroy it before more of them arrive." Chief nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need to find this anomaly. If we don't, we might be fighting an endless war." Shadow Sun stepped forward. "My people have technology that might be capable of detecting and analysing such anomalies. We may be able to determine the portal's nature and find out how to close it." Titus exhaled sharply, but nodded. Then we work together, for now. Vardis seethed. This is heresy. You consort with Xenos. The Emperor's wrath will be upon you. Titus fixed him with an icy glare. Then wait here for the Imperium to find you, if they ever do. But I will not let this abomination spread. If we don't act, the galaxy dies. Vardis faltered, but said nothing. Shadowsun activated her beacon, sending a signal into the void. Hours later, a sleek Tau battleship descended from the clouds, its engines humming softly. Rescue has arrived, she said. Will you come? Titus glanced at Chief, then back at the battlefield. Let's move out. Together, the three warriors boarded the ship, leaving behind the wreckage of war. The flood was not defeated, but the fight had only just begun. The sleek corridors of the Tau battleship hummed with a quiet efficiency that contrasted the grim reality of their mission. It had been weeks since Captain Titus, Master Chief, and Shadowsun had first arrived aboard, and in that time, Tau scientists had worked tirelessly to track the anomaly that had brought Chief into their universe. The research had been meticulous, involving extensive quantum calculations and deep space surveys, and now, at long last, the results were in. Inside the ship's central command chamber, a vast holographic display shimmered with a pulsating rift in space, an ethereal tear linking their universe to Chief's own. Tau researchers in sleek, silver-grey uniforms stood in quiet reverence before the anomaly's image, their bright eyes reflecting the swirling energy patterns. Shadowsun, ever the strategist, studied the data with arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Master Chief stood nearby, clad in his battered Mjolnir armor, his arms folded as he observed the projections. Titus, standing as rigid as a statue, surveyed the findings with his keen, ultramarine gaze, his mind already forming contingencies. The link is still open, one of the Tau scientists announced, adjusting his holo interface. A direct connection to your universe persists, Spartan. Given time, we believe we can stabilize it for controlled passage. Shadowsun turned to Chief. This means that you can return, if you wish. Chief was silent for a long moment, but then he shook his head. Not yet. His voice was firm. Not until the rift is closed and both our universes are safe. Titus gave him a nod of respect. Then we fight on. The Tau scientists exchanged glances before one of them spoke up again. We've been analyzing the anomaly's signature. We believe we can match it, potentially even manipulate it. Shadowsun narrowed her eyes. Elaborate. Well, we theorize that with precise calibration, we could move the rift, or even open new ones. Titus furrowed his brow. A dangerous proposition. Such power could be catastrophic if misused. Chief's eyes locked onto the swirling void displayed before them. A thought formed in his mind, cold and calculated. Slowly, he stepped forward and brought up a new projection on the holo display. Grotesque images of the flood, consuming entire worlds in their relentless spread. The flood is an endless horde, Chief stated, his voice grim. They exist to consume all life. They never stop, never tire, an unrelenting force. He pressed a few controls, and a new image flickered into view. The Tyranids, an eldritch swarm of biological horrors, engulfing worlds in their own insatiable hunger. But they are not the only ones. Titus and Shadowsun exchanged glances, understanding dawning on them. You propose we pit them against one another? Shadowsun asked. Chief nodded. Both the Flood and the Tyranids exist to consume everything in their path. If we can direct them toward each other, they'll do what they were made to do: fight and consume. We can turn their endless hunger into a war of attrition, one that could wipe out both. Titus stroked his chin. It's a bold plan, but where? Shadowsun brought up a galactic map, her tactical mind already searching for viable locations. The carnage will be immense. We must ensure it happens in a sector where no innocent lives will be caught in the crossfire. Chief nodded. We'll need an empty battleground. Titus stepped forward, his armored gauntlet pointing at a flashing sector on the map. The outer edges of the galaxy. Our latest tracking places a massive hive fleet here. A hologram zoomed in, revealing an approaching swarm of Tyranid bioships, drifting like a dark storm through the void. If we can lure them deeper into empty space, we can control the engagement. Shadowsun considered the plan. What about the Flood? Chief turned back to the anomaly's pulsating form. I go back. Titus raised a brow. You would lead them? Chief nodded. The Flood follows the strongest prey. If I return to my universe, I can get them to follow me. I'll guide them to the new wormhole, where we can set the two swarms on a collision course. Titus exhaled sharply. It's a perilous gamble, but a necessary one, Shadowsun added. The Tyranids will not hesitate to engage. They know only hunger. Titus looked at the Spartan. Can you manage the challenge? Chief smirked beneath his helmet. The real question is, can you handle yours? Titus let out a rare chuckle. He extended his hand. Then let's see this through. Chief clasped the Ultramarine's forearm, a warrior's handshake. Shadowsun gave a single nod, signaling her agreement. The preparations began at once. There was no time to waste. The vast cosmic menace of the Tyranids loomed ever closer, and the only way to defeat it was to lead it into the greatest battle the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Titus and Commander Shadowsun moved with urgency, departing at once to rally a fleet of Tau warships capable of intercepting the Tyranid swarm. Every second counted. They would have to strike with precision, drawing the hive fleet deeper into space and keeping it occupied for as long as possible. But that plan relied on Chief completing his mission first. Standing in the hangar bay of the Tau battleship, Master Chief took a final moment to steel himself. The glowing rift ahead shimmered like a living thing, its energy swirling in mesmerizing patterns. Beyond it lay his universe and his war. The Flood was still spreading, consuming everything in its path. He had to bring them here, to this strange battlefield, where they could be eradicated alongside the Tyranid scourge. It was a desperate, reckless strategy, but it was the only one that had a chance of saving both realities. The sleek, modified dropship before him hummed with power, its system primed for the dangerous journey ahead. It was a marvel of Tau engineering, altered specifically for this mission, a ship built to endure the chaos of dimensional travel and emerge intact on the other side. As Chief stepped onto the boarding ramp, he turned for one last look. Captain Titus and Shadowsun stood at the hangar's edge, their expressions unreadable beneath their battle-hardened composure. They knew what was at stake. "Luck be with you, Spartan," Titus called, his voice carrying the weight of countless battles fought and won. Chief gave a small nod. "I'll see you in a week." With that, he sealed his helmet, and the dropship's hatch hissed shut behind him. Inside the cockpit, the controls lit up in response to his presence. He settled into the pilot's seat, hands steady on the controls as the ship's engines roared to life. The metallic walls of the hangar trembled from the sheer power being generated. Beyond the viewport, the rift pulsed like an open wound in the fabric of reality, an unfathomable gateway linking two universes together. There was no telling what he would face on the other side. No guarantee that the mission would succeed. But he had never needed guarantees, only objectives. With a final deep breath, Chief engaged the thrusters. The ship lifted smoothly from the deck, its repulsor fields humming as it turned toward the glowing vortex. The massive Tau warship behind him shrank from view, its hangar bay becoming little more than a point of light against the void. Then, with a sudden acceleration, the ship plunged forward. The portal flared, swallowing the craft whole. For a moment, there was nothing but blinding energy, the sensation of being stretched across infinity. Time lost all meaning. The stars, the galaxies, the universe itself seemed to distort and bend around him. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the turbulence ceased. The dropship emerged into familiar space. The endless black void of his home reality spread out before him. But he was not alone. Below, a planet lay shrouded in darkness, its surface writhing with unnatural movement. The flood was here, and it was growing. Master Chief tightened his grip on the controls. The battle to end all wars had begun. The sleek Tau vessel drifted in high orbit above the flood-infested world. Its sensors were scanning the derelict Covenant warships that now served as breeding grounds for the parasitic horror. Master Chief sat at the controls, his fingers resting lightly on the targeting system. The time for observation was over. With a swift movement, he powered up the ship's weapon systems, and the advanced plasma cannons locked onto the nearest infected battlecruiser. The targeting display flickered, confirming a hard lock. "Let's see if this thing is as good as the Tau claim," Chief muttered to himself. With a squeeze of the trigger, the ship's main guns unleashed a barrage of blinding energy lancers. They struck the bloated hull of the Covenant vessel, vaporizing layers of organic growth and sending flaming debris spiraling into the void. A secondary explosion erupted as fuel reserves were ignited, tearing the ship apart in a catastrophic blaze. The reaction from the flood was immediate. The twisted, grotesque ships orbiting the planet stirred, their movements chaotic at first, but quickly coalescing into pursuit formations. They had taken the bait. Chief turned sharply, engaging the ship's advanced propulsion systems. The engine roared to life, and the sleek Tau vessel surged forward, accelerating beyond the reach of the pursuing flood ships. Despite their grotesque speed and adaptability, the flood vessel struggled to match the raw technological superiority of his ship. For the next 4 days, he executed a carefully planned strategy of hit-and-run attacks. Every few hours, he would emerge from slipspace near a new flood-infested zone, unleash devastating firepower, and then vanish before the infected ships could close in. With each engagement, more of the flood fleet was drawn into his wake, lured by the scent of battle, the promise of fresh prey. But over time, Chief noticed a disturbing pattern. The flood, for all their mindless hunger, were beginning to adapt. Fewer ships were taking the bait. Some began breaking off, returning to their previous courses, as if realizing the futility of chasing a single vessel, no matter how powerful. If he didn't act fast, the entire plan would fall apart. He needed backup. Switching to the ship's long-range comms, Chief sent an encrypted SOS signal on all UNSC military frequencies. "This is Spartan 117, requesting immediate support. Enemy presence confirmed, over." Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Finally, a response crackled through the comms. "Unidentified vessel, state your call sign and mission." Chief exhaled sharply, then responded with a classified authentication code known only to high-ranking UNSC personnel. Silence. Then the voice returned, this time filled with disbelief. Spartan 117. That's impossible. You were declared KIA months ago. Sorry to disappoint, Chief said, his voice as steady as ever. This is Admiral Harper of the UNSC Endurance. What the hell are you doing out here? And why are you flying such a strange ship? There's no time to explain. I need you to engage the Flood fleet and follow my coordinates. There was a pause. Then Harper's voice, tense with suspicion, came back. We've been tracking the Flood fleet, but we don't have the firepower to eliminate it. What exactly are you planning, Spartan? Chief's response was simple. We don't need to destroy them. You just need to engage. I'm bringing reinforcements. Trust me, we don't have much time. Another long silence. Then Harper exhaled. Damn it, Spartan. You better be right about this. We're en route. As if on cue, the Flood fleet surged toward Chief's ship, their grotesque forms twisting unnaturally through space. But before they could reach him, the darkness of the void was split by searing lines of MAC rounds and Archer missile barrages. The UNSC Endurance dropped out of slip space, its guns blazing as it tore through the Flood horde. Chief smirked. Nice of you to join. Harper's voice came through, slightly amused. We figured you could use a hand. Now where the hell are we going? Follow me. For the next 3 days, the two ships fought a running battle against the Flood fleet. The UNSC vessel provided cover as Chief continued his strategy of baiting and luring as many infected ships as possible. But the Flood was relentless, and for every ship they destroyed, more seemed to take its place. Then, as they reached the designated coordinates, Chief checked his sensors. There was nothing. Harper's voice cut through the comms. Spartan, there's nothing here. What exactly are we? A thunderous rupture in space-time interrupted him. The anomaly flared to life, its swirling vortex a gaping maw in the fabric of reality. Chief's voice was calm. That. The anomaly pulsed with an otherworldly glow, growing larger as space twisted around it. The Flood ships hesitated for the briefest moment, and then surged forward, their hunger overriding any sense of caution. Harper's voice was urgent. Spartan, what the hell are you doing? Get your ship out of here, now. And you? Chief loaded every remaining weapon on his ship and unleashed a final, devastating salvo at the pursuing Flood fleet. Explosions rippled through the infected vessels, but it was only a distraction. I'm going through. The Tial ship hurtled toward the anomaly, and in a blinding flash, it was gone. The moment Chief's ship emerged on the other side, he was greeted by a sight that would have left lesser warriors paralyzed in awe. The Warhammer 40k universe was at war. Before him stretched an immense battlefield. Tial warships maneuvered in coordinated precision, unleashing cascades of energy upon the writhing horror that was the Tyranid hive fleet. Thousands of bioships, grotesque and alien, swarmed like locusts, their organic cannons spewing corrosive death. His comms crackled to life. Nice of you to join us, Spartan, came the unmistakable voice of Captain Titus. Chief allowed himself a rare smirk. Well, I had to make an entrance. Then, as he looked back, his sensors flared with proximity warnings. The Flood had followed. With a guttural roar, the infected fleet burst through the anomaly, their ships writhing with twisted biomass. The Tyranids, sensing a new, unknown threat, immediately turned their attention toward the invaders. Titus's voice rang clear. All ships disengage. Let them fight. Chief watched as the ultimate nightmare unfolded. The Tyranids and the Flood, two insatiable forces of consumption, began to clash with unrelenting fury. The void itself became a battlefield of unspeakable horror. He exhaled. The war of attrition had begun. Let them eat each other alive, he muttered. And so, the greatest battle of annihilation in the history of these two galaxies commenced. The void was a maelstrom of annihilation. The Tyranid hive fleet and the Flood, two of the most nightmarish forces of consumption in existence, had clashed with terrifying intensity. The darkness of space was alight with burning debris, ruptured bioships, and shattered carcasses of flood-infected monstrosities. Every second saw a new detonation, a fresh explosion of bone, metal, and flesh, as the two juggernauts of destruction tore into one another. From the bridge of the Tau command ship, Commander Shadowsun, Captain Titus of the Ultramarines, and Master Chief watched the carnage unfold. The sheer scale of the battle was beyond anything any of them had ever witnessed. Clusters of flood-infected Covenant warships lunged forward like rabid animals, their grotesque biomass-covered hulls bristling with writhing tentacles and spore cannons. They crashed against the living wall of the Tyranid biofleet, which responded with vast torrents of corrosive bioplasma and spore mines that exploded in searing clouds of acid. Tentacles lashed out, piercing Tyranid hulls, spreading the parasite like a disease, while massive hive ships retaliated by tearing apart the Flood ships with crushing mandibles the size of cities. Mycetic spores swarmed over Flood vessels, birthing countless waves of Hormagorns and Carnifexes, which carved their way through corridors infested with mutated monstrosities. It was a battle of relentless horror, and endless, ravenous hunger meeting its match. By the Emperor, Titus muttered, watching as a Bio-Titan, a beast large enough to crush warships in its grasp, tore through a flood-infected battlecruiser, only to be overwhelmed as its infected biomass latched onto it, rapidly reshaping it into a grotesque, shambling nightmare. Master Chief's visor reflected the madness before them. "It's working," he observed, his voice grim yet steady. "They're consuming each other." Shadowsun, arms folded, nodded. "The Tyranids have the numbers, but this is not their element. They are strong in planetary invasions, in ground wars, in massing their hordes. Here, in open space, their superiority is diminished." Hours passed. The battle raged. But something had changed. The once overwhelming Tyranid hive fleet was dwindling. Their tactics were faltering as more and more of their ships succumbed to the infection. The Flood, despite being outnumbered, adapted faster than even the hive mind seemed capable of countering. A soft, beeping noise caught Chief's attention. He turned to see a Tau scientist standing at a console. His blue skin was pale, his large black eyes wide with horror. "What's wrong?" Chief asked, stepping toward him. The scientist's voice wavered. "Our long-range sensors, they're detecting something. Something in the heart of the battle." Chief's expression didn't change, but his tone sharpened. "What is it?" The scientist swallowed hard. "The fighting, it stopped." Titus turned sharply. "What?" Shadowsun's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. They have no reason to." The scientist's fingers trembled as he brought up a magnified display. A flickering image of the battle's core filled the screen. The Hive fleet's central mass, where the largest Tyranid ships had gathered, had gone eerily silent. The once chaotic motion of combat had ceased. No weapons were fired, no swarming ships, only stillness. The flood ships, the scientist whispered. They landed in the core of the fleet, and the Norn Queen, she's... His voice faltered. The words wouldn't come. Chief's fists clenched. Say it. The scientist turned, his expression one of pure terror. She's infected. A hush fell over the bridge. Titus exhaled slowly. Shadowsun's eyes darkened, while Chief remained motionless, his mind racing. Then the ship's klaxon screamed to life. A deep, droning alarm blared through the command deck, and every warning light flared blood red. The ship's AI intoned with a chilling calm. Incoming weapons lock. Hostile targeting detected. Shadowsun whirled to face the nearest display. The sensors now showed a terrifying reality. Both the Flood and the Tyranid fleets had shifted their attention. The silence had ended. And now, both forces were looking. Titus slammed his fist on the console. Defensive maneuvers, shields up, all weapons online. Chief turned to Shadowsun. Get us out of here. The Tau commander was already barking orders in her native tongue. The ship's engines roared to life, thrusters burning bright as they had prepared for emergency slipspace evacuation. But before they could engage, the first attack came. A beam of sickly green energy lanced through the void, narrowly missing their ship. Another followed, this one scoring a glancing blow against their shields, sending ripples of static across the bridge. The infected bioships had fired first. The void was no longer a battlefield. It was a hunting ground, and they were the prey. Titus's voice was grim, his expression carved from stone. If the Flood control the Norn Queen, then they control the fleet. They control everything. Chief's voice remained steady, his tone betraying no fear. We're looking at the worst-case scenario. The Tau scientist's voice was barely above a whisper, his hand trembling over the console. A Flood-controlled Tyranid fleet. There's no stopping it. No force in the galaxy could stand against them. The ship rocked violently as another blast struck their shields. The warning alarms blared with increasing intensity. Shadowsun's pilots worked feverishly, plotting a desperate escape route. But the infected fleet was closing in fast, their monstrous forms shifting with an eerie purpose. Master Chief stepped forward, his gaze locked on the monstrosity before them. The battle had changed, but one thing remained the same. They had to survive. He turned sharply to Titus. There's only one thing powerful enough to wipe them out. Titus frowned. Where? Chief's expression was unwavering. It's not here. It's back in my universe. Titus processed the information quickly, his mind working through the implications. Are you sure? Chief's voice was firm. It's our only chance. Titus didn't hesitate. He turned to Shadowsun, his tone sharp and commanding. Hold the line. Cover us. That's whatever time you can. Shadowsun met his gaze, her expression hardening. We'll do what we can, but don't take too long. Titus turned back to Chief. Let's move. The two warriors sprinted through the corridors of the Tau vessel, weaving through frantic crew members as more enemy fire rocked the ship. They reached the hangar, where a sleek Tau shuttle awaited them. Without hesitation, they boarded, sealing the hatch behind them. Punch it, Chief ordered as he took the co-pilot's seat. The shuttle roared to life, its engines blazing as it shot out of the hangar bay. Behind them, the Tau Armada surged forward, their weapons unleashing a storm of fire against the approaching terror. Explosions flared across space, but the enemy's advance was relentless. Titus gripped the controls, guiding the shuttle toward the swirling portal in the distance. "Let's hope whatever you have in mind is worth the risk, Spartan." Chief's gaze remained locked ahead. "It will be." The portal loomed before them, a churning vortex of unstable energy. Behind them, the battlefield burned, the Tau fleet struggling against impossible odds. The Flood Tyranid hybrid force was adapting, learning, growing stronger by the second. But Chief and Titus had a plan, and if they succeeded, they would bring back the only weapon capable of stopping the horror before it consumed everything. With a final burst of acceleration, the shuttle plunged into the anomaly. A blinding flash consumed them, and then silence. As the light faded, the two warriors found themselves back in Master Chief's universe, staring into the abyss of deep space. The battle on the other side raged on, but now they had a fighting chance. Titus exhaled. "Now what?" Chief's reply was simple. "We get the only thing that can finish this." The war was far from over. The shuttle roared through the void, its sleek hull slicing through the fabric of space like a knife through flesh. Master Chief sat in the co-pilot's seat, his gaze locked on the endless abyss before them. Captain Titus of the Ultramarines stood beside him, arms crossed over his ceramite-plated chest. As they approached their destination, a massive construct emerged from the darkness. A ring, impossibly vast, stretched across the void like a god's halo. Its surface shimmered with an artificial atmosphere, vast landscapes and oceans curving along its inner rim. It was ancient, yet intact, a relic from another age. "What is this?" Titus muttered, his voice tinged with awe. Chief's visor reflected the ring's massive expanse. A halo installation. Titus turned to him, his brow furrowed. "Explain." Chief leaned forward, activating a holographic display. A three-dimensional rendering of the halo array flickered into existence. The halos were created by an ancient race called the Forerunners. They were built as a last resort against the Flood. Titus studied the projection. "And their purpose?" Chief's voice was steady, grim. "Extermination. The halos don't just destroy the Flood, they wipe out all sentient life in their effective range as a means to starve them." Titus's eyes narrowed. "And what is that range?" Chief hesitated, then he spoke. "Galaxy-wide." For a moment, silence hung between them. The implications settled like lead in Titus's chest. "The power to destroy all life in the galaxy," Titus whispered. "That is beyond comprehension." Chief nodded. "It's why they were only used once. The Forerunners activated them to stop the Flood, but it cost them everything. They wiped themselves out along with their enemy." Titus paced, his mind working through the weight of what he had learned. "And you believe we can use this against the Tyranid Flood monstrosity?" "We can modify it," Chief replied. "We don't have to fire it in its original form. If we access the control center, we can calibrate the pulse to target only the Tyranids." Titus turned back, intrigued. "Specific targeting?" "Yes. The halos can be altered to focus on genetic markers. We can ensure that only the Flood-infected Tyranids are affected." Titus considered this. "And if it can be modified to target the Tyranids, could it be modified to target all Xenos?" Chief stiffened slightly. "Technically, yes. But," Titus' expression darkened with thought, "this could be the Emperor's will, a weapon to scour the alien from existence." Chief exhaled. That's not what we're here to do. Titus met his gaze, his blue eyes sharp. Isn't it? Chief stood, his presence imposing even next to a space marine. The Tau have treated me better than your Imperium ever has. I won't let this ring be used against them. Titus held his stare. Then, after a long moment, he nodded. We'll finish this fight first. The discussion can wait. They landed on the Halo's surface, traversing its vast metallic corridors until they reached the control room. A massive holographic display flickered to life, Forerunner glyphs illuminating the chamber. For days they worked, Chief using his knowledge of the UNSC's past encounters with the Halo systems, and Titus guiding the modifications with his own battlefield wisdom. The array was calibrated to emit a pulse targeting Tyranid genetic structures, leaving all else untouched. Finally, the work was done. Chief sent a signal back through the portal. The message requested that the Tau fleet generate a new portal at their location to bring not only them back, but the Halo ring itself. A new portal swirled into existence, engulfing the Halo ring in a vortex of energy. When the blinding light faded, they were back, and the battlefield was a graveyard. The Tau fleet was gone. Ships lay in burning ruin, debris scattered across the void. The Flood Tyranid fleet had moved on, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. Chief and Titus piloted their shuttle, searching for any survivors, and then they found one. Out of the entire Tau fleet that had stayed, there was only one surviving vessel. They boarded and quickly found a handful of Tau scientists who still barely clung to life. Their faces were pale and their bodies weary. One scientist stepped forward, his voice shaking. Commander Shadowsun. She gave her life to buy us time. She piloted her flagship into the heart of the Tyranid fleet and detonated the core. Chief's jaw tightened beneath his helmet. She saved you. The scientist nodded. She saved many. Chief placed a hand on the scientist's shoulder. She didn't die for nothing. Titus turned to the control panel, gazing at the Halo's dormant systems. No, she didn't, because now we finish this. Chief nodded, his gaze hardening. Let's end this war. Silence stretched for a moment as they absorbed the grim reality of their surroundings. The wreckage of the Tau fleet floated like the bones of a long-dead giant, frozen in the abyss. Fires still flickered in the husks of shattered warships, their embers slowly fading into the void. The scientist's voice broke the quiet. We barely had time to react. They came down on us like a tide, faster than anything we could have anticipated. His hands trembled as he gestured to the ruined fleet. It wasn't just the Tyranids. The Flood adapted, learned, and spread faster than we imagined possible. Titus turned to Chief, his expression grim. Then we don't have time to waste. Chief gave a single, resolute nod. He turned his gaze back to the Halo installation, its immense structure looming behind them. A weapon powerful enough to shift the balance of the war itself. He clenched his fist. This ends now. The control room of the Halo installation was bathed in an eerie blue glow, its ancient mechanisms humming with dormant power. Master Chief and Captain Titus stood before the central console, staring at the holographic display that outlined the fleet of Tyranid-infested vessels drifting in the void. The Flood parasites clung to them like leeches, using the hive fleet as an engine for their relentless spread. "We've confirmed it," Chief said, his voice level but heavy with the weight of their decision. "There's no other sentient life in range. We're beyond the edges of the Milky Way. The only thing this pulse will touch is the fleet." Titus nodded. "Then let's proceed." Chief entered the final sequence, his fingers dancing over the ancient interface. The Forerunner glyphs shimmered in response, adjusting the parameters of the pulse. They had calibrated it precisely. Not a galaxy-wide extinction, not a genocide, but a surgical strike. The halo would release an energy wave, turned to disrupt the nervous systems of the Tyranid bioforms, severing their link to the hive mind. The flood parasites would remain, but without hosts to feed on, and no intelligent life for light years, they would wither and die. Titus placed a heavy, armoured hand on Chief's shoulder. "Are you sure?" Chief glanced at him through his golden visor. "Yes." A final keystroke, and the halo pulsed. A wave of invisible energy expanded outward, moving faster than light, warping space as it passed. The silence was absolute. The only evidence of the activation was the faint vibration beneath their boots, the power of the installation flexing its might. The pulse surged forward, its range expanding with terrifying precision. As it reached the Tyranid fleet, the results were immediate. Bioships the size of cities writhed as their neural pathways were severed. The once coordinated movement of the hive fleet broke down into chaos. Smaller vessels spasmed uncontrollably before going limp, their organic hulls shriveling. Larger ships buckled, their great chitinous spines cracked as the biological machinery within failed. The intricate network that connected every Tyranid lifeform collapsed, leaving them as nothing more than rotting husks drifting through the void. The vast synaptic echoes that once bound the fleet together fell silent. The Tyranid fleet was dead. But the flood remained. The parasites slithered through the husks of their former hosts, tendrils curling over dead biomass. They attempted to animate corpses, to spread. But there was nothing left to control. No active nervous systems, no mind to corrupt. With no living organisms left to infect, the flood was now stranded in the void. Even with their terrifying adaptability, the endless abyss would be their prison. Starvation was inevitable. "They'll starve," Chief muttered, his hand slowly unclenching. "It's over." Titus exhaled a long breath, nodding slowly. He turned to Chief, extending his gauntleted hand. "You fought well, Spartan. The Imperium owes you a great debt." Chief hesitated for the briefest moment, then grasped Titus's forearm. The handshake was firm, a warrior's bond forged in fire. But as their grips tightened, Titus's voice lowered. "This weapon, it will save the Imperium." Chief's fingers twitched slightly, his grip tightening for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then, without warning, he pulled Titus forward and slammed a fist into his chest plate. The impact rang like a hammer striking a forge, but Titus barely moved. Chief followed with another strike, aiming for the weak point between the plates of armor. Titus staggered back, more out of surprise than pain. His expression darkened. "I don't want to fight you, Spartan." Chief took a step forward, fists clenched. "You're not taking this ring." Titus raised his hands in a placating gesture, though his stance was still firm as ever. "This weapon could save billions of Imperial citizens. Even as a deterrent, it could turn the tide of our war against the Xenos." Chief shook his head. "I trust that you believe that, but I've seen your Imperium, your Inquisition. I know how this will end. The wrong hands will end up using it, and I can't let that happen." Titus sighed. "I had hoped you would see reason." His hand moved subtly to his belt. Regrettably, the wheels are already in motion. Before the words had fully left his mouth, the void outside the Halo installation twisted. A massive rupture in space, swirling with warp energy, split reality apart. From the howling abyss, an Imperial battle group emerged. Dozens of warships, their hulls adorned with Gothic spires, purity seals fluttering in the silent vacuum. The Emperor's warships, each a cathedral of death, loomed above the ring, casting immense shadows across its artificial surface. The lead vessel, an Imperial battleship, dwarfed all others, its gun batteries shifting to target any who would dare oppose its will. Titus watched the fleet's arrival with calm certainty. His eyes flicked back to Chief, expecting resistance, but not the small, knowing smirk hidden beneath the Spartan's helmet. A deep hum filled the room as Chief's HUD flared with alerts. Another rift in space tore open, this one bright with the azure glow of slip space. A fleet of sleek, angular warships surged forth. UNSC battle cruisers, their MAC cannons primed, escort frigates moving in coordinated fashion. The ships maneuvered with surgical precision, taking up position between the Halo and the Imperial Armada. A deadly silence stretched across the battlefield, the void itself holding its breath as two mighty war machines faced one another. Titus's smirk faded as he turned back to Chief. "So, you had the same idea." Chief folded his arms. "The moment you realized what this ring could do, I knew you wouldn't let it go." Titus inhaled deeply, his fingers flexing against his gauntlet. "This is bigger than us, Spartan. This weapon will be used," Chief interrupted. "Not as a shield, not as a deterrent, but as a hammer. You believe you'll use it wisely, but I've seen the Imperium. Someone will fire it, you know that." Titus's jaw tensed. For a long moment, neither warrior spoke. The tension in the control room was as heavy as the fleets hanging in the void beyond. The installation hummed around them, an ancient construct that had already seen one civilization destroyed by its power. Would it witness another? Chief finally broke the silence. "I'm leaving, and I'm taking the ring with me." Titus exhaled slowly, reaching down. His hand brushed against the hilt of his combat knife. "I can't let that happen." The blade whispered as it left its sheath, its polished surface catching the blue glow of the control room's hollow displays. Titus leveled it at Chief, his stance unwavering, his intent clear. Chief squared his shoulders, his hands clenching into fists, his muscles tensed beneath his armor, ready for what was coming. His voice was quiet and resolute. "Then let's finish this." The control room erupted in a storm of violence as Master Chief and Captain Titus clashed, their armored forms colliding like living war machines. Chief struck first, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to close the distance in the blink of an eye. His fist, backed by Mjolnir's servos, hammered into Titus's chest plate, the impact resounding through the chamber. Titus staggered, but did not fall. Instead, he retaliated with terrifying speed, his gauntleted fist swinging up in a brutal uppercut. The blow caught Chief under the chin, sending him skidding backward. Titus pressed forward, seizing the moment, his power-armored bulk moving with alarming speed, his fists striking with the precision of a veteran Astartes. Chief barely managed to deflect a strike aimed at his visor, rolling to the side in order to create distance. He reached for his combat knife, but Titus was relentless. The Space Marine slammed a shoulder into Chief, sending the Spartan crashing against the console. Sparks flared with shattered interfaces as Chief's shields flickered and died. "I respect you, Spartan," Titus said, his voice calm despite the fury of battle. "But you cannot stop the Imperium." Chief's visor rebooted just in time to see Titus's blades descending. He twisted aside, the knife sparking against his shoulder plate instead of piercing his armor. Chief drove his knee into Titus's gut, following up with a strike to the Marine's exposed neck joint. Titus grunted, but barely faltered, his sheer resilience nullifying what would have crippled a lesser foe. Meanwhile, in space, the battle between the UNSC and the Imperium had reached its climax. The UNSC fleet fought valiantly, their Mach rounds tearing through smaller Imperial vessels. But the sheer firepower of the Imperium's warships proved overwhelming. Lance batteries and Nova cannons carved through the sleek UNSC ships with merciless efficiency. A battlecruiser detonated as its reactor went critical, taking 2 escort frigates with it. The UNSC was losing. Chief saw the battle unfold through his HUD. His forces were outgunned. They needed to retreat. But first, he had to survive. Titus swung again, his knife slicing through the air. Chief barely had time to dodge, but countered with a strike to Titus's knee joint. The blow staggered the Space Marine. Giving Chief a moment to draw his own knife, he lunged, driving the blade toward the weak point between Titus's armor plates. But Titus was even faster. He caught Chief's wrist and twisted, forcing the Spartan's arm back. With his free hand, he struck Chief's helmet with a devastating punch, cracking the outer plating. Chief reeled, his vision swimming. "You cannot win," Titus growled, twisting Chief's wrist further. "Yield." A sudden crack split the air, followed by a flash of blue energy. Titus stumbled as a plasma bolt slammed into his pauldron. More shots followed, striking with pinpoint accuracy. A second later, 3 armored figures emerged from the shadows. Blue Team had arrived. Kelly 087 moved like a spectre, her speed a blur as she fired another plasma round from her sidearm. Linda 058 covered her from the flank, her rifle aimed squarely at Titus's head. Fred 104 charged, his boot slamming into Titus's back, knocking him forward. Titus roared in frustration as he spun to face the new threats. He blocked Fred's next strike, but he was forced to backpedal as Kelly and Linda closed in. Chief recovered, shaking off the daze, and together, the 4 Spartans pressed their attack. Even for a Space Marine, fighting 4 Spartans at once was an impossible task, but Titus fought with brutal efficiency, his strikes landing with bone-shattering force. Yet he was still outnumbered. Kelly's speed, Linda's precision, Fred's strength, and Chief's unyielding resilience overwhelmed him. Finally, Chief delivered a devastating blow, a calculating strike to the side of Titus's head. The Space Marine staggered before collapsing to the ground, unconscious. Fred raised his rifle, ready to end it once and all. He's too dangerous to leave alive. But Chief stepped between them. "No," he said firmly. "Titus isn't the enemy. He fights for his people, just like we do." Fred hesitated, but relented. Chief knelt and secured Titus's restraints. "We're leaving, now." The Spartans hauled Titus's massive form onto the stealth shuttle. Chief watched the battle in orbit. The UNSC was faltering. If they didn't leave now, they never would. "Blue Team, Get us back to the destroyer, Chief ordered. We're retreating. As their shuttle slipped through the void, Chief opened a comms channel. UNSC fleet, fall back through the portal. We're done here. The surviving UNSC ships pivoted, their engines flaring as they sped towards the anomaly. The Imperium attempted to pursue, but their massive ships lacked the agility of the UNSC vessels. One by one, the Spartan's fleet disappeared through the gateway. Before Chief followed, he opened a direct channel to the last surviving Tau ship. Open the portal and send us back to my universe, along with the Halo array, then shut it, for good. The Tau scientist on the other end hesitated. Are you certain? This will sever the connection permanently. Yes. The portal flared open, pulsing with raw energy. Before departing, Chief placed Titus in an escape pod, inputting coordinates that would send him drifting toward the Imperial fleet. As the pod ejected, Chief activated the comm. Titus. The Space Marine stirred, regaining consciousness just as his pod drifted toward the Imperium warships. He locked eyes with Chief through the viewport. You fought well, Chief said. Another time, another place. Maybe we wouldn't be adversaries. Titus exhaled, nodding slowly. Perhaps. But know this, Spartan. I will not stop fighting for my Imperium. Chief gave a faint nod. And I'll never stop fighting for mine. A long silence stretched between them, a mutual respect forged in the crucible of battle. Then, with one last glance, Chief cut the connection. The UNSC fleet and the Halo array vanished through the portal, sealing the path between their realities forever. Weeks later, Captain Titus sat in a cold, steel-walled chamber deep within an Imperial fortress. The air was thick with incense and the quiet hum of interrogation servitors. Across from him, Inquisitors loomed like spectres, their faces shrouded in shadow. You consorted with Xenos, one interrogator accused, his voice like iron. You let the weapon escape. Titus remained silent. The weight of the accusation hung heavy in the chamber. He slowly reached into his armor and withdrew a small data disk, setting it on the table with a soft, metallic clink. I did what was necessary, he said, his voice unwavering. The Halo is beyond our reach, but I have found something far greater. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. What is this? Titus leaned forward, his voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. The key to opening more portals. A heavy silence filled the room. The candlelight flickered, casting long shadows over the chamber walls. The Inquisitor's fingers closed around the data disk, his gauntleted hand tightening. Explain. Titus smirked, just barely. This is a means to take the war beyond our universe. The war was far from over.